be doing that. I'll just make sure that people can share their screens as well. And I was just explaining to Bianca that we had a sort of like just a quick check-in with everyone yesterday about how they were feeling about group critiques, what their expectations are, and kind of and how they work. I kind of picked up on a little bit of I don't know what the word would be, sort of like tensions maybe in the room around that. Maybe because we've done this trace reading exercise straight away, and actually I'll probably try and introduce that slightly differently next week. But this crit really is just about sort of sharing work in progress. There's no expectation to kind of like you be saying this is something that I've finished. The kind of trace thing we'll put to one side. So it's just a way of kind of after your icebreaker exercise this morning to kind of have sort of 25 minutes each to kind of share a slice of what you do. It kind of give us a bit of an insight into what you do, what you're hoping to get out of the next few days, and obviously Bianca's here as your kind of main facilitator, so there to sort of offer some feedback or some mirroring. Really, for me, I think I'm just going to be taking some notes because it's useful for me to just be in that sort of like listening mode and kind of thinking about what I could be doing with anything from that afterwards. I mean, how's everyone feeling today? Because I know I feel like, you've been for a run, Louise. Miguel, are you all right? Is your sort of son okay? Or are we just...
You're on mute.
Yeah, I think everyone can come off mute.
Yeah, he's fine, but he's in the bedroom now.
Okay.
So it should be fine.
Okay, but it's good to know just in case there's any distractions there.
Yeah, what happened in the morning is that I had to go to school to collect him, to pick him up because exactly at 9 because my wife left him at school, but then I had to go and pick him up because she couldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's good to know because try and do a check-in with people normally anyway. Just
it's also because of COVID. Like as soon as a child he's sick or throws or whatever it is, they need to send him home because they don't know.
Yeah.
Is that the same?
Him or her, right? So it's always a bit it's just like these things.
He has a bit of a cold or something, Miguel, or what?
Well, yeah, but you never. Well, he threw. So maybe something he ate, or it's a virus, or it's something that will pass. But last week, maybe 10 days ago, something happened as well, and then he had to stay at home like for 3 days, or it's mandatory. You can't go back to school. So.
Sure.
Wow.
And Bianca, is your child feeling?
He's better. He went back to school today. So.
Okay. So.
But I also went through a very stressful winter with quarantines, and it was just a mess basically, because you can't work with a child at home, and the government doesn't quite understand that that's the case. So mess.
Okay, so it's all right. Well, and anything anyone else wants us to know about their situation at the moment before we get in? My cat is making a lot of noise. That's the only thing I ever have to worry about. Well, actually, I'm quite tired. I'll tell you that now.
I had a bit of a tummy ache this morning. I don't know why.
Say that again, Jamie.
I had a small stomach ache this morning. Maybe it's what Miguel's son has. I don't know. Maybe we both ate the wrong thing.
Okay, so I've got a little schedule together. I'll do some timekeeping. I mean, I think, as I said, for now, really, you should be able to share your screen if that's how you'd like to use the sort of 10 or so minutes to present what you're doing. We'll go around. I think, honestly, just in terms of kind of getting feedback from everyone, it's just sometimes it's just useful doesn't have to be kind of like really insightful questions or comments. A lot of the time it can just be, repeating what you saw, but we'll just see how we get on. So is there anyone that would like to sort of kick us off? Great. Okay, well, let's go with Miguel then.
Yeah, just in case. All right, so let's go. I'm going to share my screen. I have actually I promised to speak only the time, but it's quite more, it sounds like a more formal thing.
Oh, wow.
No, sorry, not, it doesn't matter. So it's a lot of slides, but most of the slides is just like 1 second to show, because I want to basically explain where I'm coming from and where I am now with the project. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Because otherwise it makes a little bit of sense. So are you seeing my screen now, right?
All good.
So, I mean, I told you before, I'm a curator. I was trained as a curator. I practice as a curator, but my work has been always about, or at least in the last years, about what to do with art and the art institution today within the neoliberal times in which we live. So, I don't know if my slides, I think they're messed up a little bit, but anyhow, museums are for the 1%. They are space of privilege, but they are also space of privilege, not only in terms of class, but also identity, excluding, this is like the typical demographics of museums. This is a picture of a museum in the UK where I used to work in 2007. But I mostly try to repurpose the arts institutions and arts into a space of inclusivity and diversity for others and the other. So I use a lot of Gregory Chalette stuff, which we will hear about Gregory, I think, at the end of our program, of our residency. He has a very important point. So it's kind of a Marxist lineage of setting up a critique of the institution of art, where today we use a lot of languages of social justice to kind of mitigate the tradition of the museum or the art institution as a space of privilege that I kind of alluded to. But we do that without really questioning capitalism itself. So we kind of perpetuate the intrinsic connection that there is between art and capital. And for me, part of my research has to do with how this is connected to what is the perception and understanding in the writing of art in history, and now an alternative type of practice, what we now call socially engaged, but has roots much more deep in time and is evolving as an alternative. This is a slide I have from other contexts, but interestingly, there is the Blue House here. You see this Blue House slide? The Blue House is actually a project by Jenna. So anyhow, to move very quickly to what we are currently engaging with. So actually a point that I think, Andy made in the morning when we were speaking with Catherine. So I actually made this connection between dark matter, which is this idea of the invisible mass of people sustaining the art world as we know it, although it is not really recognized as such. And I actually made this also, this is the old slides, and exactly this link. So between the iceberg, diverse economies iceberg that Catherine has been using and others, and the idea of dark matter. So then I don't need to talk about this, but this is basically how I explain my practice as civic. But basically, to try to understand art as a tool or device towards community building that creates social change. So the arts organization is a public resource. So moving to my current situation. So I am based in Cork. You can see here facing the UK. And I work in a small town called Cove, which is really close to Cork, but it's already in the coast. And this is a very important place in Irish history because this is the major port from where immigrants left Ireland in the 19th century and still today, but mostly in the 19th century. And this is sorry for the pictures, this is the town and this is the building from where I operate, which is called Sirius Arts Sirius. And this was originally from the 19th century, a yacht club. Apparently the first yacht club in the world, and this would have been the clubhouse of the yacht club. This town called Cove, it historically has been very connected with the Irish, English or British Irish power. It was even renamed as Queenstown in honor of Queen Victoria, who visited Ireland and arrived through Cove. So the building has always been part of the elite, captured by the elite. and still today is seen as a building for the elite. Before it was for yachting and basically social life around the privileged classes. Today is a space for art, so it's for the elite. So there's always a problem with connecting this building with the locale. And this is just an Instagram screenshot of our current today Series Art Center. So when I started a year ago, long story short, I started really a month before COVID-19 exploded in Ireland. I still attended the last day, the last event of a project in which an artist called Colette Louise, who is actually part of the cohort of participants in our residency program. So Colette had been engaging with Series Art Center before, prior to my arrival, on a project around engaging people from specific demographics in Ireland, older people. And it was more a research. So in speaking to her, we were early on, before even the explosion of COVID-19, talking about evolving that research into something that could be implemented. And we started to talking about reforming economies. And basically creating a community of interest, which would be local, which would be intergenerational. So older people with younger people, in order to share knowledge and skills from those skills of people who are seniors, retired or not, but who have been made redundant by a productive understanding of what work and capital is, and try to connect them with younger people who could be at the forefront of a more civic agenda around environmental issues, so the idea was to create this kind of community model of exchange. And we were already planning events, particularly sites like field trips, explorations of local areas, picking. I guess my conversations with Colette were also informed a bit from my work and knowledge about Catherine Baum's work. And we set up this, and we were going to try to do this. So this was after the first lockdown, but ultimately couldn't be possible to do it. So we actually then thought about moving into a situation where we would create a sort of think tank. This is now the last 6 months. A think tank group where we could develop the theoretical mindset that then would enable us to start implementing some of these ideas or see how they could be implemented. And the think tank has been about setting up a series of online discussions. This is a preparation, more emails, and you can see there's a reference here to Take Back the Economy book. I don't know if you can see it here. And so we move into this idea of research action on site to a much more kind of think tank situation where we set up several workshops and discussions around Take Back the Economy. So we started with the book. Then we had Catherine speaking about her project as like a case study. And then we started looking into the diverse economies iceberg. And ultimately, we are now drawing our own version through these online workshops, which we'll then try to finalize in the summer. And then this started to be a bit more informal, a set of ideas and talks and discussions, and then it became a program on its own. So this is now how is it advertised in Eventbrite, using still the same image. So the image is an aerial view of Great Island where Cove is located, and then there's basically a monthly workshop or talk or panel discussion, and they are also uploaded online. So this is the last one was with an artist based in Glasgow, Ailey Rutherford, who also worked with Catherine Gibson, and here it's 6543. Number one is a different thing, so they are all uploaded there. And so even Catherine Gibson appears here, but it's not her speaking; it's one of her videos online. So we also so this was a way of introducing the book. And that's where we are now. We hope to conclude this series of events in June. And then moving on from July onwards, we will continue a kind of a more theoretical discussion in parallel with offsite activity, which we'll then see how we'll converge by the end of the year and hopefully paves the ground to a more localized intervention from next year onwards. And I'm doing this in dialogue with Colette most of the time. Okay, thank you. I think this is it. Yeah, it's my last one. I'm not sure I took a lot of time.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Miguel. Really super kind of clear, really
so you
could, there as well.
So you could see when Andy and everyone else, when the UNIDEE residency was advertised, you could see how it was echoing a lot of the stuff we were already trying to do or thinking about.
Yeah.
So both myself and Colette, we decided to apply, but she was also working with Plot, which is now she has been selected because and I'm also somehow connected with them through Plot. But we thought it was an interesting thing also to have both of us, and then we are also going to somehow cross over our own understanding and learnings from the residency at some point, because we are all more or less based in the same area. Okay.
That's great. And so, Miguel, I just wanted to kind of like the last question that I'll just ask in that, because you've covered so much and it's given a really good background and kind of what's happening, what the ongoing practice is. I mean, yeah, just thinking about this week, what's kind of useful for you, do you think, in terms of, you know, the sharing or the unpacking? What did you sort of hope to get out of the 1 week intensive?
Well, for me, it's an opportunity to hear from other people working elsewhere who may have encountered some of these theories or projects in the past or may not. So I'm interested to also to hear from, like, get to know what others in other locations are doing. And having done a little bit more, and then particularly drawing from individual perspectives, maybe this week, maybe after, but say, Jo asked the question last Saturday, which for me is very important. So I want to develop that. Some other might be working more around themes of social justice and ecology. Here, something I forgot to mention is that we are doing this also in dialogue with an environmental justice advocacy group based in Cove. So it's kind of more, so we started, the idea of taking back the economy is actually a way of talking about sustainable living. Mm. And Cove now, it would require a much deeper, another conversation. It also has a strong tradition of environmental justice for different reasons. There's a lot of strong local groups. So that was our way, kind of our entry point. Rather than a specific critique of capital, we wanted to use the tools of, say, take back the economy ideas towards speaking about sustainable living, rather than simply talking about, we want to create an alternative to capitalist social relations. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what I expect from this week is this opportunity of sharing, hearing from others, and hopefully take impressions that help me move me and others working with us moving into implementation. So with Bianca, for instance, it can be interesting. She explained last Saturday where she engaged with, say, with Catherine Gibson or the team, mm-hmm. and they organized stuff in the Alps, and now they are producing. So what are the issues around it? But then, how do you understand your cycles of production in more general terms, whether it's around decolonizing, decolonial thinking or ecological thinking, like we were asking you about the bottles and the water and all of that. So that's quite what will enable me and others to think through these ideas beyond the idea and towards the action.
Sure, but this, just to be clear on it, sorry, do you mind just stop the screen sharing, Miguel?
Yes, of course, I'm sorry. I know.
See each other a bit clearer, but that's it's brilliant to have those slides as well, fantastic. But yeah, so just the question, for me to be specific about it, the implementation, is that something that you're hoping to kind of start to test and pilot in this throughout the residency? Some sort of small, some ways of starting now that are things back to normal, in the sense that you can start to do some stuff outside?
It's probably, it will probably meet some of the times. Maybe it will still be, maybe we can still organize some sort of on-site or off-site events while we are in the residency time frame. But it's only today. Only yesterday, the reopening of activity in Ireland is really now starting to take place. So until now, we have been not able to even meet outdoors for activity. So this is a question I haven't discussed with Colette yet, but we potentially maybe speed up some of the things, or we might test at least an activity while we are working around the residency to see how what might happen. We try to avoid coming from top to bottom. So it's also about the people we are, more or less the network of people that we are operating with locally. We need to operate around their ideas and interests as well. So we haven't talked about it yet.
Great. Okay, that's brilliant.
But
I'd like to open it up for some kind of feedback from anyone else that fancies sort of chipping in.
Well, I got some feedback and some thoughts that come up. Thanks, Miguel, a lot for the presentation. I find it fascinating to see that we're so many working on these topics in lots of different places. I think it's really empowering in a sense of giving energy and knowing that we are many. I was thinking towards the kind of thing you have shown, what art is for, and the public museum to some extent. And I was thinking, because in my own work, I think a lot about commons as well. And I was thinking, what would be the common, what would be the common museum? Is that different from, because a public park would be different from a common park, in the sense that the public park would still be maintained by public authorities, whereas the common park is maintained by the people who use it, who live around it, and also from further apart who come and who use it. And there I was thinking, it's really nice to then play with the community economies idea as well, of saying, how can the museum become a resource for all these processes that you want to trigger? Because actually the building is really, it's iconic, and somehow I felt quite colonial, and to be like, how can you actually, can you start to compost this in some way? How can you start decomposing it through practice, and maybe also taking some risks there? I think it could be really exciting to play with that, and to then go in a sense from, because I think the whole language around neoliberalism, I think it's still really relevant, but people also think probably with this whole pandemic, something is shifting also in how we see the system. The system is naked. We just see this is complete crap and it's oppressive and so on. So I think maybe through practice, there could also be a pushback at language and, pushback at practice, spatial use and language. How do we frame what's going on here? Which is really difficult because it's a new kind of paradigm emerging, or a new kind of reading. But I think as artists, we can totally be part of that, of that reframing.
The question of the commons is exactly at the core of all this. I don't have an answer to you. But it was a really interesting point you made, from a public resource to a resource for the commons, or of the commons. I didn't mention this, but one of the theoretical frameworks I use is based on a book called The Undercommons by Stefano Arni and Fred Moten. And they make a critique of the neoliberal agenda, of the university as potentially being a site of resistance, but have been captured by a neoliberal order. But you are totally right. The question is exactly how to operate from within a site, a building in particular. And specifically that building is really important what you said. It has this flavor, we call it is an Italianate architecture. So, but the building is indeed part of the colonial occupation by the British of Ireland, and the local industry is all based on tourism. So these liners, these massive cruises, right? That are one of the most predatory industries in the world. The only place across the whole Ireland where these massive ships can port is actually in Cove, next door to the building where I am, operating from within. So we are not at that stage yet, to be honest, because the building has been mostly closed in the last year. So even personally, I don't even have yet an experience of the building to even understand its potential, but its issues as a social space. So we are doing different things at the same time, trying to test them. But indeed, the idea is that the art institution, whether it's represented by a building or not, or operates from within it or not, should be a space for the commons. But that's exactly the challenge we are always facing. And that question is always about equity, distribution of power, and so on. And so it's still an issue. It's still a problem, and it's an exercise. It's kind of a continual exercise and practice. Yeah. So a project like this is a way of operating from within and outside of the building, and also to introduce a new language and a new perspectives into even the rationale of the organization and the way this organization was publicly perceived, because it was very reduced in its function as an art space. Okay.
That's great, Miguel. And it's good to sort of understand that, yeah, so the sort of two directions are sort of both kind of maybe speaking out to the publics that could be allowed in, but also to the institution itself. So, I mean, who is essentially your boss? Kind of like, who do you have to kind of convince to make it used differently? Who is it?
You're asking me?
Is it like, is it the local authority, or is it, who do you kind of like?
The organization is an independent company. So formally, I have to respond to a board who formally represents the community. And then I have my stakeholders, who are my funders, which are governmental agencies. And then there is the ecology of peers operating from within this area. And all of them have a very, well, in my perception, also having arrived from another country 2 years ago to Ireland, my perception is that the critique of institutions that has taken place in other European contexts is still very much underdeveloped here. And the arts organizations are still pretty much seen as hosts of art, whatever that means, but hosts, not interventionists, not producers, do not have a civic voice, do not contribute to debate. So as much as we are doing this project and others, we are changing completely how the organization is perceived publicly, but also trying to contribute to a debate that positions the organization in line with others, maybe not so much in Ireland, but elsewhere. But by doing that, we are also creating tensions with our colleagues and within the system. So that, because then, we don't necessarily speak or act the way we are expected to. Yeah.
That's really useful.
So far, so good. Let's see when we move, because we'll see let's see. But there's a lot of other questions, like when we did our session with Jana, and even I think with Bianca and Catherine, there's a lot of questions around resources as well. And what level of, and it's not by chance that a lot of the projects I refer to, or a lot of us operate from within Europe or the Western world, where the resources are, or resources and the alternative to those resources are more or less somewhere. And because, you need, even to make a critique of your own, you need to be able to do that. Yeah.
Sure. Louise, did you have a kind of comment to make?
Yeah, well, a few, and I mean, they'll probably come out over the course of the week, but it's just something that came up, that you mentioned. You're trying to position your museum within a kind of international conversation, and I'm just thinking, this is an insight I've just had this week, my conversation with Catherine, and how much I've seen that I'm somehow slightly individuated from a wider community of practitioners, and like how the community economies thing is completely international, and it's like a platform that creates these spaces for dialogue, and I just wondered if you could envisage anything like that with museums, like where there were people actually coming together to share insights, learn from each other. I don't know what it's like to work in a museum. I envisage that there might be a sense of competition, like of course there's that tension with a kind of market kind of brand, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, there are different kinds of networks where museum professionals or art professionals from where they can operate. There are a few which are more representative of professional bodies, like they are professional bodies. But there are others who already operate in network, who somehow have different. They have their own specificities, but they also have shared sensibilities around somehow. Basically doing what we call self-institutional criticism. And some of them, are operating mostly in the axis of Central Europe, from the Netherlands, some in the German, some in the north of Europe. And so, yeah, there is, but you are also right. It's not like exactly an academic network, or because you are right, we also compete for different kinds of similar resources. But I have lots of conversations with peers, and I am part of informal groups of people somehow, and I learn where I learn from, and I have even one-to-ones, mentorships, and so on, so that I don't come on my own, and I have some sort of equipment, intellectual equipment, to put forward some of this stuff. Yeah.
Right, Jamie, did you want to go in there? I
think it's Jo who also contributes, or you usually, or does something with the Whitworth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did a kind of residency with the Whitworth.
The lobbying team, right?
Young people. So I was like doing Zoom workshops for them. So yeah, it was nice hearing you talk about like young climate activists, because that was a lot of what was being like drawn out in those workshops. And yeah, I'm interested to hear more about how it was like younger and older people interacting as well, because like all the stuff that I've done that's been youth work has been like exclusive with young people, and I think it can be really great because you get all these things like bouncing around, and there's so much energy and so much excitement. And then I think actually a lot of the young people that I work with are kind of feel quite disconnected to generations above them, and like, you know, they might feel disconnected to their parents in a kind of normal teenage way, but also there is this huge like generational gap, and I see it goes both ways as well. Like even just stuff like with like recent waves of activism, young people like kind of almost feeling like they're the ones who have discovered this, and like for me, because I guess I kind of got a lot of my political education through like workers organizing, where there's like more of a lull well, kind of maybe it's taken off a bit more, but like through my lifetime that's been a bit more of a lull than it was in older people's lifetime. So I've had kind of a weird like in between. I think there's so much stuff that we need to share between all generations. So yeah, I'd love to hear about how that exchange goes in your workshops, because I think it's really cool.
So the starting point was that by doing localized research, also with Colette, we realized there is, well, and in general in society, there is a sort of undervalue or a removal of value to skills, expertise that were from people who are now in their 60s and 70s and 80s, which, so the advent of technology, making manual labor and other kind of knowledges that are informal, home baking, picking, all that kind of things that fall outside of the capitalist economy and fall within the invisible part of the iceberg, let's just say it. So so there was this undervalue. So we wanted to pick on that and reassign value, or understand how this can actually be valid and today, right? On the other hand, there is this generational gap around technology, where my son is 9-year-old and he knows better how to use my mobile phone than I, right? So, and apparently there is also this question around older people not being able to use technology as younger people. So we were trying to see whether in workshop situations or in real life scenarios, there could be an exchange, like things we know from the past will become redundant or are no longer considered productive, which might be interesting for people today, the future generations, younger and future generations, in ways of creating a different way of a lifestyle that is much more sustainable, and vice versa. And how can we share tools, either whether technology-based or others, that can be used by older people to either share that knowledge or even be more interventionists within a discussion or in social life. So, but this has been only tested in pilots, because when we were going to start working around this, on one hand, we don't even know. It's really much about testing things and see what works and doesn't. And then we had to stop things, and now, so that's where we are. We saw, okay, we can't operate in that way. We're going to create some sort of critical mass around us that will then maybe help us think through this in a more activist way in the future, and so on. So that's the next stage. Again, revisit that, reorganize, relocalize ourselves, reconnect. Ultimately, reconnect is the most important thing. But because Cove also has a maritime tradition and all of that, so we identified a lot of skills around fishing. People used to work in heavy industry, so making, or picking and making our own food, growing, all of that is the kind of activities that we want to engage with, and we understood as potentially so being part of this invisible part of the iceberg, which we want to galvanize, and then through that also engage with younger people around activists, say environmental justice issues, because they are already part of the mindset, the local mindsets. Yeah.
And it would be, but so there's been a pilot on that, but the kind of the actual sort of rolling out of it might happen at a later date. And just to be conscious of time, so it'd be nice to sort of move on maybe just after, if there's another question or comment. I think Jamie, did you want to ask something earlier on, or has that been answered?
It may or may not be relevant now. I was just curious about other communities that might be addressable in that area. Like, as we try to think this through with you over the week, I was just wondering about, like, I know a lot of port towns have immigrant communities that are historic, but then maybe have been displaced because of development and stuff, from my time in Halifax, Nova Scotia, for example, which I was just curious about. Like, it seems like an area that would have had slave trade. And...
It's a very interesting question, because when I was working in England, I was pretty much involved in questions around racial divide, ethnic divides, and newly arrived communities from refugee backgrounds, and the tensions with the former working class, because I was in a really post-industrial area. Here, it's also a little bit of a post-industrial area, but there is much less clash, let's say, ethnic or other clashes. So other communities, I mean, I would need to spend more time explaining this, but it's a bit more, so say from an ethnic viewpoint, everything is much more homogeneous. So the question here is much more about typical post-industrial contexts around under what is known as pockets of deprivation against pockets of wealth within the same territory, the tensions between an economy driven towards tourism and embedded, localized, more sustainable practices. And then how do we situate ourselves within these debates? So again, there is a lot of work to do with specific areas of Cove around engagement with groups that maybe even need part of this project, but that's still pretty much to do in terms of being present on site and starting generating ideas from within the local needs and contexts rather than from above, from top to bottom. Because the risk is I come from this kind of more like, say, social theory background, and I want to avoid that. I think we also touch upon this a little bit in the morning, I think even with your question, Jamie. So we want also a lot of the stuff to emerge from the local needs and interests rather than from a straightforward social theory, academic or museum kind of context. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, I mean, that's a really good sort of insight into what you're doing, Miguel. Questions that we can all sort of be, sharing, hopefully that you'll be able to pick up on with the rest of the group as well. And it does sound like it's this sort of, the implementation, the kind of piloting, the kind of like, the what's worked in these different spaces that, you could sort of pick up on as well. And it would be great to see those getting tested out or piloted, especially, I mean, for me, especially when you mentioned the thing about the kind of digital literacy and the kind of skill exchange there, because obviously there's this moment now where it's kind of like, oh yeah, maybe grannies have started getting a bit better at Zoom, like, and a bit more sort of like willing to have that conversation right now. It's like there's times where that's happening, as you say, like informally, as well as kind of what's happening.
Yeah.
But let's keep it moving around, and kind of we can always sort of pick up on some more common points at the end as well. Is there anyone that wants? And yeah, we've got the sort of chat going as well, which we'll save. So if there's anything that comes up for references and other stuff, please do put that in there. Was there anyone? Louise, did you want to go next? Because I'm conscious you might have to.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. And also might be quite relevant. It's great to hear about your work, Miguel, because the thing I'm going to be talking about is my first experience with a museum. So I'll be talking about that a little bit. However, it will not be as slick at all as Miguel, so you might have to bear with me. So I've organized a few things to show you on my computer screen, but I haven't like got a whole thing. I'm gonna start here, which is a bit of a strange place to start, but it is an origin perhaps of, actually what I just also want to say first of all is that I had so Bianca, so that you know, I'm a human geographer and I come from a more academic background, a political ecologist. And I'm moving much more now into like participatory and action research methods, looking to do them specifically with experts, people in power, scientists, and people that do policy making. Because all of my research has been about the problematics of like orthodoxies, basically, of knowledge and frameworks of understanding and epistemology that get translated into world-changing programs and governance techniques, which are very deficient in lots of ways. And I think from a personal perspective, I've existed in this world for more than a decade, researching, working between policy and academia, and just being like, what are these journal articles doing? Like, this is traveling nowhere. I've become very interested in the role of experience and affect, and then also like, yeah, working in this action research, transformative space, so that I'm no longer just analyzing a world. But I'm also very interested in the role of artifacts and devices, and that is what's going to shape the particular project I'm going to talk you through today. I'm going to talk you through the kind of abandoned project, which I applied for this program with, because I haven't got the funding for it. I haven't abandoned it forever, but I've just parked it, and I'm going to focus on this project instead with you guys, because I need some help. So when I talk about devices, I mean things like this. My research has, can you see that really hectic graph? Can you all see? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna, this is a history of, so I look at green economies and the kind of relationship between capitalist logic, actual financial markets, and then kind of neoliberal environmental policies. So this is the origin of the cap and trade mechanism, carbon trading in the 1970s. What you can see now is a diagram called the no net loss of biodiversity. Biodiversity is on the left scale, the positive and negative. And this is quite a complicated diagram to describe, but the point is that it's about offsetting. All the yellow bars below the line are environmental impacts. The green things that then feature above the line are environmental credits or biodiversity credits. It means somebody's like cut down a forest over here, a developer, and they said, well, look, don't worry, we'll plant the forest, the trees somewhere else over here, and that's a credit. So they've offset the damage that they've created. The whole system is an accounting imaginary that comes, that originates from these cap and trade mechanisms. And this is the current, so that's a biodiversity thing I just showed you. So it's about ecological habitats and living things. And this is about net zero. So this is the net zero framework up to 2050, which is now going to, like, the UK has a net zero target. It's the new kind of poster child of climate governance. Everyone thinks it's amazing. It has so many problems within it, epistemological problems that you cannot see from the language or even from this diagram. But the point is that these devices are world making. They do a lot of imaginative and intellectual work. And whilst I've been writing about how they do this, I'm like, well, okay, what other types of intellectual and imaginative work could we do with other types of devices and artifacts? And I've been following Jacob Gibson's work for quite a few years, and it really got me out of an impasse like intellectual and emotional impasse back in 2016. I'm going to show you this. This is now, what can you see now? The diagram?
It's just loading up, Louise. Might take a second.
Can you see anything? What can you see now? There's a colorful writing. Yeah. Okay, so this is what I'm showing you is slides. I did a participatory action research course back in February this year with the people at Wageningen, Bianca, who I think you know, Anke de Vries and Megan Ormond. So yeah. Wageningen is now agricultural university in the Netherlands, and they ran this early career researcher project for, I think it was 10 weeks or 8 weeks or something. And I had to do a reflective journal. This is one of the slides I made. So this photograph was taken from the World Forum for Natural Capital in 2016, which is like a bureaucratic conference, basically, where investors come together with politicians, researchers, loads of consultants, obviously, like going for work. And we were doing an ethnography there with a bunch of geographers. What you do is you follow the dramaturgy of the conference, because we recognize that these are like world-making spaces where new orthodoxies get agreed, new alliances are made, and funding decisions are made, and narratives are produced. And so we were doing this ethnographically, and I was, if you can read the small text, I was with all these furious geographers who are Marxist political ecologists. I was like, why are we even here? Like, we are cementing this reality through being here, you know, like this is very much in line with Jacob Gibson's Graham. She's trying to think about moving beyond cementing this capitalist reality that we're all analyzing all the time in our critique, because through the critique, the research is active. It's actively making this reality we're talking about. And I didn't really do very much with this, but over the past few years, I've been sort of really racking my brains about how I can. It's surprising to me that it's taken me this long to actually do an action research methods course, but I'm glad that I have now, because I've been sort of dabbling more in the sort of Anthropocene arts communities, the people, you know, learning about what it means to create situations and experiences, and learning things through situations and the world-making, world-changing effects of creating new situations and relationships between people. That's a little bit of a background, because, and amazingly, actually, just on the run that I just taken, and I have to say my brain is already like firing off tons of thoughts just from our conversation this morning and this week and the residency so far. And I think maybe a good umbrella term to describe what I'm trying to do is a kind of experiential and critical pedagogy for experts, in quote unquote, you know, people that hold power. And the media, or the process, the actual practice that I'm really going to try and develop is both a field trip type of model, and that's the thing that I've abandoned because I didn't get the funding. That is I've just finished a fellowship with the Parliament in the UK, looking at in all the new agricultural policy that's coming. We've got a huge generational shift in our environmental legislation in the UK at the moment because of leaving the EU. We're leaving the Common Agricultural Policy. Can you see this once and future land thing? Cool. So this was a proposed field trip exercise that I will do at one point, but I'm just a bit full right now, of taking parliamentarians that I've been sort of writing a 100-page report for, which is really frustrating, but so that we can have a critical pedagogy about what land is in the UK at this really pivotal moment in time. So we were going to do a pilot study in the northwest of England, because I'm affiliated to Lancaster University, and that's where I did the fellowship. And it's also like massive centre for environmental science, environmental sociology in the UK, and has strong connections to policy. And also the northwest of England is upland areas, so the sheep farmers are going to lose the most they're going to lose out the most with Brexit. It's just riven with fascinating histories. It was the cradle of industrial capitalism. You know, we've got a witch trail that we were going to go down and explore, like histories of enclosures and the relationships to like patriarchy and witch hunts, you know, through Sylvia Federici's work. Anyway, so these are just some actual images from another field trip that Jamie and I were on, going down the Mississippi River Basin with the Hakebe, the House de Culture and Develop. which has very much inspired my idea to do this, but specifically with policymakers, industry people, third sector people, and so on. You know, I didn't get the money for that, and I wanted to do it in October, so I'll do something a bit smaller. But for now, what I want to do, if you're still following, is, hang on, where can I show you? Maybe I'll go back here. I am going to, hang on, actually, I changed my mind. How am I doing for time, Andy? I'm like rapid fire.
I think we're doing good. I'm just
right.
also moving. Yeah, we've got definitely a couple more minutes for you to sort this through. That's no problem.
Okay, so what I'm going to be doing with this week in particular, and again, just had like a really great hour work on it in between our morning event, and now I had lots of insights. So I'm organising a public programme at MAT, the Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology in Lisbon, in connection with this exhibition called Aquaria, or the Illusion of the Boxed Sea. And the programme I'm developing is like a 4-day public programme that draws out comparisons between aquariums as architectural devices that are really, like, I had no idea how rich they were, and kind of geopolitical significance, and obviously like epistemological significance in terms of seeing a fish in the eye for the first time ever for a 19th century person. But we're going to do a comparison between the aquaria as this like boxing of the sea and marine protected areas, because I've also been doing quite a bit of work with art science, ocean advocacy stuff. So this is for TBA 21 Academy, who are an art foundation. And here, as well as like field trips we're doing to mussel farms, and we're going to be speaking to marine ecologists and like environmental humanities people that write about, you know, feminist politics of eating fish and all of this kind of thing. One of the things that I'm really excited about, and actually is what led me into this, and I'll be trying to develop this week, is a workshop model that brings together about 20 people, 5 policymakers in Portugal who are working with marine protected areas, 5 conservation biologists, 5 designers, and 5 museum public attendees. And we'll run a 3-hour workshop that's going to be informed and shaped by these transformative and participatory action research methods, in particular something called Theory U. I don't know, Bianca, if you know about Theory U very much. Okay, yeah. So it takes people on this like reflective process where you kind of come together, you check in, you open up heart spaces, you might do a meditation of some kind, like make it as fun and slightly weird as possible. And then you use different types of methods to kind of make things visible, and then reflect on them, and then transform them, and then feedback. And it's this like deep reflective process. So I really wanted to bring together these different actors, like scientists, policy makers, designers, and the public, to basically level out a democratized kind of different knowledge holders platform, where we could look at the devices and the architectures of marine governance. So this is why it's handy that it's in an architecture museum and an architecture exhibition, because I'm really thinking about like deconstructing what the parts are. Like I was going to do an inventory of devices. So I mean, I think it's things like GIS models, like spatial planning techniques, like laws, regulations, loads of things. I need to do that mapping, and I'm trying to think about what the exercises look like that we will kind of work with. And so for me, the challenge is like developing these moments of encounter between different groups of people, and working out how to do transformative work with artifacts and devices as kind of intellectual tools that are structuring the way people think, as a form of critical pedagogy for these experts, and then record it too, and reflect on it, and write about it, and think about it as a kind of broader method. I mean, I think that probably covers quite a bit. Do I have any more time? Because I could show you a couple more things, but
I think that's really useful, Louise. And just to get an idea, so you're hoping to actually just sort of trial or test out some elements of this that might be part of this 4-day workshop this week.
I don't know if I'd have chance to like, I'm going to actually really make a stab at just getting the workshop designed this week. I don't know if I would be ready to like prototype something with people by Thursday or Friday, but I would like to have a good draft of it established.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And well, but yeah, if there's, I mean, I don't know. I was just wondering then if that means, yeah, if there are bits of, or just, yeah, to just maybe explain a little bit more about what the exercises, I suppose, that make up the 4-day workshops might be, or kind of like how, what you're thinking along those lines.
Yeah, so it's a 4-day program. So this day one, we were going down to a mussel farm in the very south to think about farming, and that's just a fairly straightforward field trip exercise with different groups of people. The main, and then the rest of the weekend will be panel conversations, film screenings, interviews, and things like that. But the workshop itself is a thing where we're actually trying, it's like participative and engaging.
Cool. So sorry, that's part of this 4-day program, the work.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, so how long, I mean, have they told you how long it can be, or are you still working that bit? Is that still open?
Well, the actual workshop, I would aim for something like 3 hours. So it'd be a Friday afternoon. And what I was thinking, we're also having a dinner, so a companionship dinner. So in playing on the etymology of companionship, which is taking bread together, companionship is taking fish together. So we'll eat the mussels that will be supplied from the farm, and we're having a big dinner at Matt on the terrace, and we'll have like some prompts and artifacts for kind of conversations and reflections about what. So there's 2 strands. One, there's a workshop strand going down the aquarium route, which my colleague Carson's running, and I'm running a marine protection area route, and then we're going to bring the both workshops together. So the reason I mention that is because I'm thinking, I'm trying to think, how can I lure policymakers down to do this workshop? And I think if I say, look, it's a program and there's dinner, and like obviously it's like a nice, I make it into an invitation. That's what I'm thinking. That would be on a Friday afternoon on the 2nd of July. In fact, the meeting I have to go to at 4 is to basically agree all of these budgets and stuff, and the different parts of the program.
That's great. Okay. Well, I mean, we've got sort of like, I don't know, 10 minutes more. So it's just whether you think maybe we could get some comments or reflections from the other people. And if there's more to go through, it might sort of be useful to pull up this screen again. Is there anything that anyone wanted to reflect back or ask or comment on?
I think it's cool. I think, you know, it's a kind of great area to go into, to speak with the policymakers. Because somehow I have the feeling that the ones that I work with in the Alps, they really need to kind of be taken by their hand to see the ontological shift that is going on. Like, I mean, sometimes I'm missing the words even for how different we see the world. You know, if I think that I'm part of nature and nature is acting through me, you know, there is still sometimes a view of like, no, actually we are in charge and we need to structure this and that. And maybe, I mean, I'm just thinking of how these activities that you will propose can propel them into some kind of experimental space in their head, because they really need to break open. And I was just thinking, like, even when you go, you know, when you go to see the mussel farm, what do you need to give them that they look with a different lens? Because I'm pretty sure that when they walk there, they will see things that very different from what you might be noticing. So how to kind of introduce them, and I don't know, I find it exciting. And to me, just also as a reference, the work of Adrienne Marie Brown came to my mind, and what's her name? Valida Imarisha, that she works with. And she's talking about visionary fiction and how we can create visionary fiction together. And somehow I think there is potential there to also just invite them to, you know, break those boundaries that they have. Because in the Alps, the conversation always goes back to what's the economic aspect doesn't work, so we cannot do it. And then imagination is already shut down. Yeah. And how to push them beyond that cliff to say, just fly, you know, there is more to what we can imagine.
Yeah, thank you. Can I shall I respond a sec? I think for me it's just about, I'm so interested in positionality and professionalized subjectivities, and the way that people really overly perform what they think is expected of them. But in the end, they are just concerned citizens. Most of them really are like invested in what they do. I mean, some aren't. I know some are like perfunctory kind of, but it's about trying to access that space of like personal investment and care. People, the trope is like appealing to somebody's children or something, which is a bit tired, but you know, what will their children experience? But yeah, and really what I want to do is trying to build up some literacy and like a toolkit basically for what those sorts of transformative, blowing everything open methods might be. So, but incidentally, also, I think, funnily enough, the organizational studies world, like the kind of the corporate transformational techniques, probably are pretty good at, because they go into like a corporation and be like, right, everyone, we want your absolute depth of your creativity and imagination and care and concern for like this new innovation. It's probably something to learn somehow from that world.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm going to just, I know Kristina's got a comment, so I'm going to pass on to you shortly, but I mean, we had a little one-to-one, Louise, and it reminded me of an artist who some other people might help me with here, Carey, who does a lot of work with kind of like in the corporate sector, and it's almost like as an intervention. And then sort of thinking back to that artist placement group in the kind of like in the 70s, who were, you know, being, you know, going into normal workplaces. So I think this idea of translation to people in power from kind of like arts, and whilst I totally agree with Bianca in terms of like you want to kind of create a experience for them that breaks them out of a way of thinking, I also think the particular skill set that you might have there is in kind of like being able to almost like deturn or kind of like play around with the thing that they're also used to. So some, you know, that kind of like, it is trying to find that kind of tension, isn't it, between the familiar and the uncanny. And if it's too crazy, then basically it's just like, oh, here's some artists getting us to do something bizarre, and then you forget about it. But actually sort of something that kind of almost starts as something they're expecting and goes somewhere else is another way of thinking about that sort of stuff. But I'll pass on to Kristina, because I know you were commenting.
Thank you. No, so I find this fascinating, this especially this last part, and yeah, I kind of appreciate your efforts in dealing with the people of power, maybe because I kind of do it the other way around. So my question is, or comment, I'm not sure, if in this workshop that you need to design and plan, if you have thought of involving or including in one way or another, like normal citizens who have got no power, or for example, workers from the mussel farm, either to be on the other side and lead the workshop themselves to these people of power, or maybe on an equal level to be kind of a group dynamic things together.
Yeah, it's a really nice idea. It's sort of traveled through my mind quite quickly, and not in a way that I've kind of sat with, but the idea of, I mean, a museum going public that would come to this, and not exactly going to be like your average kind of public going, are they? But you're so right about this idea of inviting fishermen or workers actually with direct investment in this would be super interesting to bring them into the museum space and do it. Big, yeah, challenge, but yeah, I love that. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Has anyone else got any sort of anything to add, or questions, or just things that they picked up from? Thanks for the artist reference there, Miguel. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask or put in?
I mean, I don't know, Louise, it's so fascinating. It's so, I mean, the breadth of stuff you're talking about, it's beyond imagination. So I also could see, I think, I'm not sure, I saw in our Padlet or yesterday on your email, all your connections with this AKV and TB21 and all of that. I was actually quite surprised. It's incredible. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say that is helpful to you, but I was interested when you said that you like this being in the middle of policy making and say academic work, and now I guess activist work. It's hard. It's really complicated to situate yourself within it. But my only suggestion is that, you seem to be touching a lot of things at the same time. And you may need to in order to be effective, you may need to focus. And also try to understand how to translate different contexts. Say, okay, doing a public event, a series of events in Lisbon, where there is actually an oceanarium built in 1998 to celebrate, you know, it was the Expo, Lisbon Expo, and this is kind of the celebrating the new Portugal, you know, blah, blah, blah. But there's no criticality around marine life, the entrapment of animal life within a specific case, the histories of that, a place that has a colonial history related to sea travels, but has no real, you know, MAT, the museum is actually, you know, just next to the river where the boats would depart. So I guess the question is how to translate different experiences in different locales into something that make sense to you, and also how you can translate that into new projects, new programs. But on the other hand, operating from within this kind of arts context, museum like MAT or TBA 21 or HKV, it's actually quite interesting because that's exactly where you may be pulling together all these different knowledges and skill sets and connections you have, because those are the spaces where it's all fine to bring all that together. And one day you're speaking with a policymaker, and the other day you're speaking with an artist, and another day you're speaking with members of the audience. And I think that's potentially where you can find a trajectory, even professional, just not intellectual, where you may be able to have an impact. Because correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm asking too much questions, but or making just random notes, but correct me if I'm wrong. In that event that you mentioned at the end, did you felt like intellectually or personally or emotionally like, what am I doing here? Like what, because I feel a lot of that when I'm in places where I don't belong here, I don't work for the 1%. And on the other hand, 1% is completely surrounding the type of infrastructures from within which I usually operate. So how can I retrieve from that, but concurrently being critical of that? So,
you mean the event at the end, the MAT?
No. That's that kind of conference that you mentioned, and you showed an image where it seemed seemed to have been a turning point to you.
Yeah.
And is it an ethical dilemma you face? You know, like, you see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you just want to stand up and like shout at everyone because they've just made some really, and everyone's just sitting there polite clapping, and you're like, no. So I think what you pointed to, and what I definitely, just from a personal perspective, this idea of like moving through different spaces, losing legitimacy actually when you move into a new space, and how you maintain that for like the academic geographers, for instance, whether they care about art, you know, that's too fringe for them, or the policymakers, or even the policy folk. I mean, like, it's a real dexterity, I guess, that is, I think my brain has kind of had quite an intense year thinking about it all and existing in these different spaces. So I mean, I just have to reflect on that somewhat. But I loved your point. I think what I heard was you saying like maybe the museums can be quite useful spaces. In fact, this is how I feel about MAT, is this really amazing opportunity to have this sort of institutional grounding where you can maybe just do something quite weird, because you might get a policymaker to a museum and the geographers will come. And so as a space where you can do things, it feels quite freeing. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for that, Louise. Really good presentation, and really kind of like, I mean, yeah, I think there's, you know, some questions that need to be answered now, but things that are coming out from that around sort of what the practice is and where it sits, because I think actually, you know, the other side of this is there's a great potential there for kind of more collaborative work with sort of more self-identified artists who wish to make that change to policy because of this interpretation that you're sort of able to do, you know. But like as a skills base, it's an incredible thing. I'm just thinking about how forensic architecture or forensic oceanography work as a kind of collective of, you know, sort of policy researchers, and yeah, the researcher in that context is, you know, in the end probably the most crucial part of it, because that's the person who's going to make the change, and the artist might play a role in kind of, you know, but I think really, yeah, where thinking about it more as a a part of a collective practice. Not that you have to form one immediately, but it's kind of like might sort of free up or take some of the pressure off as well. But yeah, really totally fascinating stuff. Thank you. And really good comments and questions from everyone as well. Thanks. So Louise, if you do need to pop off at some point, we know that's not for another 40 minutes.
4
Okay,
o'clock, yeah,
just,
thank
yeah,
you.
I'm glad we got you in there. Pardon me. Is there anyone that would like to volunteer to go next, or shall I just begin to select off of my screen? Jo, would you mind going next, just because you're so closest to me virtually?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this last year I've been working as a PA, which in like disabled and social care means something very different to like the more mainstream use of the word PA. I'm a personal assistant for disabled people, so I support people with anything from like personal care to mental health response to housework, and I do some advocacy as well. And I work for 3 people, and all the people I work for are queer and have really struggled with getting adequate care through like more mainstream services, partly because of like transphobia and homophobia, and partly just because it's difficult for anyone to get support in any way, shape or form in the UK. And I also am an organiser with a group called Care and Support Workers Organise, and we are fighting for better rights and conditions and pay for ourselves, but also for a overhaul of social care and for it to be brought into democratic public ownership. And this is something that needs to be co-produced between workers and disabled comrades and service users, and that includes disabled workers as well. And yeah, there's a lot of kind of complications with organising and with like social care in general. Like even say for example, like the World Care is like really not appreciated by some people, but for others, especially workers, because we do care a lot, like it, and that's what people put at the center of their work and at the center of their organizing. It's a really important word. So already when you even just start to describe what's going on, there's already these kind of I guess like tensions and complications coming out. So yeah, we need a complete overhaul of social care, and we need to like redesign it from the ground up. But it's like, yeah, there's just so much to explore and unpack, because it's not like ordinary workers organising. Like the people who are my bosses sort of depend on me in a very different way. Like even for example, like taking this week off work was quite complicated, and I haven't done it fully. Like I'm still working this week because one person who I work for, if I don't go, she won't see anyone all week. So yeah, the way to organize as workers, but the way also to work with service users becomes quite complicated. And then added to the fact that like we are a workforce that has terrible conditions, terrible rights, it's all shift work, it's hard to even like meet. So we're sort of kind of just getting off the ground with being a proper functional group. So that's kind of one part of my life at the moment. And then another thing that's I'm excited about that's happening is I'm volunteering, doing art sessions with a little boy who lives in care, who's autistic and like just really lovely. And the sessions are really fun and I'm learning a lot. And my kind of research question that I applied to the residency with was kind of asking if there's any parallels between creative work with this kid and the kind of methods that I use in that, and organising as a worker, and organising with disabled comrades and stuff. And sort of some things that I've been like reflecting on is like, yeah, this idea of like co-production. Like, it's not just like, oh, we listen to the voice of disabled people. It's like we, you know, it's co-produced, and how that kind of might apply to like the work with this boy is like, yeah, like structuring sessions around things that I've noticed he's communicated that he's more interested in, rather than like just responding to that kind of as and when it happens. And another thing is like, so he doesn't speak, and I'm still like learning how much speaking he understands, but he communicates in other ways, including Makaton. And I've really realized like, oh fuck, like, I need to learn more Makaton in order to you know, collaborate with this boy. So it's like, you know, following his language, and in a similar way, in like organizing with disabled comrades, I think it's very important to like kind of follow in their language as well, even though I've still not like gotten rid of care from my vocabulary. There's lots of other changes that I've made and that we've made as this group, to do with like language. So that's kind of my like line of inquiry and like where I'm at. But I feel like, I guess like there's lots of like tensions going on with like speaking about people, and not wanting to do that, and definitely not wanting to like speak for people. And I guess like in the creative sessions with this boy that I'm working with, like his art is his own, and I'm not going to be sharing it. But then I have shared on the Padlet like a kind of trace of we were doing some collaging, and I took a photograph of the book that he had been ripping stuff out of. But then that was very much like my aesthetic and not his. So that I think brings up like a lot of questions about like leadership and power and ownership, I guess. And I think that basically with like the workers organising and with the work with this little boy, we aren't yet at co-production. So some of my questions feel like comparisons feel a bit disingenuous and a bit like, I don't know, I feel like I'm in a weird space. But then I also have yeah, so that's kind of two sort of combined, tied together things. And then I also have been having like sort of insomnia and like lots of anxiety dreams and like hallucinations at night. And this has come at the same time as the Supreme Court here in the UK has ruled that like care workers aren't like legally entitled to a living wage on sleeping shifts. And it wasn't like triggered by that or anything like that, but just the fact that there's these kind of two things going on at once. And there's like kind of some theories that I spent like kind of time on when I was in uni to do with like 24/7 capitalism and stuff. And I feel like there's kind of something there, but I don't know if this is me shying away from talking about certain other things that relate to other people because I don't want to speak for them, or if that's sort of, yeah, I feel like I want to make weird art about my insomnia and like workers' rights. So but I don't know if that's me just wanting to kind of go and be more on my own. I don't know, I'm still figuring it out. So that's kind of where I'm at. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's loads in there, Jo, and like getting through that much in that amount of time is also. So, I mean, I've made some notes, and you can just sort of like, you know, might be handy for me to do a sort of recap, just make sure that I've got them written down right, because there's a lot of like specific sort of language there as well. It'd be nice from, you know, me to learn from as well. So you're working as a personal assistant for 3 people who are all queer and disabled, and then because they're queer, it's difficult for them to get access to the same sort of care, which is still inadequate, but is kind of even more difficult for them because of their sort of, I guess, double identity there. And then that's leading to some sort of, yeah, working with disabled comrades and kind of and care workers as kind of some sort of form of workers organization, or thinking about what the possibility is there. And then you've also got this kind of work that's one-to-one with an autistic boy. And did you say how old he is? Is he kind of?
He's 13.
He's 13, right? And that's kind of more like as a private sort of tuition tutor sort of thing.
It's just like voluntary, so like there aren't any like defined aims from it or anything, like, and it's just started, so I'm still like just getting to know him. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so that's kind of running in parallel, but you're sort of already, which I mean I think is the fascinating part of it, thinking about how those experiences with that individual might also translate or kind of resonate with the kind of larger scale of workers organizing and how those come about, and particularly around these methods of co-production or trying to kind of work with those with I guess vulnerable or kind of like groups where there's an added layer of ownership or problematizing the ownership and authorship in that, which is really interesting, and is bringing up all these other sort of issues around language and translation and actual other types of language that are getting used there. And then this last thing to throw in is the kind of your own personal experience at the individual level of kind of being a care worker and potential sort of triggering of anxieties from not being. So you've almost got these three levels where it's you as a person, the person, a one-on-one relationship, and then the kind of wider community of kind of care workers or and just let me understand that care worker is a problematic sort of term for people that are involved in that industry at the moment, and what are the other options?
Well, it's like it depends on who you ask. So like out of the 3 people who I work for, like I think it depends. I think some people prefer the word care, some people don't care, some people prefer that, because I am a personal assistant, like that is my job, so some people prefer that I say that about myself, but they don't mind that care and social care exist as terms. But then like Greater Manchester Disabled People's Coalition want the word care like out of support, and they prefer support worker because they don't like that it kind of emotivizes it and like makes them seem inherently vulnerable rather than like made vulnerable by society, which I think makes a lot of sense. But then like especially when you're organizing like with care workers, a lot of whom are new to organising, that kind of doesn't really ring. And like, but you know, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be challenged at all. So that's the kind of tensions that are going on with it. And like, like one of the people who I work for will introduce me as her carer and like does just say that, and it's like not really touched upon. So there's lots of different like ideas around it, I guess.
Right. And then, so I'll just, that's just so I've got those bits written down. Did anyone else want to? Kristina?
No, I mean, this part of language really interests me, and maybe we touched a bit upon it this morning in another context, but I mean, I've become very sensitive to it like in recent years, and I just finished preparing content for a publication, a handbook and a toolkit about cultural rights for the Arts Council of Malta. So I was really, really careful on like what language to use. And I noticed in your presentation just now, and also on the Padlet, I noticed that it seems to be okay to use the term disabled, like disabled people. For example, over here, that is considered as not politically correct. I don't know how it is in other cultures, but for example, over here, we say people with disability, and that is a very hot topic for the Commission for the Rights of People with Disability here in Malta. So I just wanted to kind of see how the situation is over there.
Should I come back on that, or like?
May I? Interestingly, I also, the questions of language is very complex, and what are the ideology, what is the ideology behind it, and how does that translate either prejudices or perspectives and so on. We do a lot of work in museum sector around language, or we try to do, to be more, say, accessible and or inclusive but interestingly, what you said about, for instance, people working in support contexts, for instance, what your personal experience of trying to get rid of the word care in order to, because of what it means. Interestingly, in the last year, since COVID-19 became dominant, at least in the Western world, and particularly in the field of arts, the word care became a keyword, a buzzword. You see it everywhere. So I was just very, I don't know, this is nothing really significant, it's just a comment, but I was really interesting to see like those really operating in the fields of practice who relate to providing assistance or whatever is the word that you use to others are trying to move on from that kind of language, while we are trying to incorporate that language that is already being criticized. So it's something I just took note because I will have to reflect on it at some point. But it's for you to see how different fields of practice have different moments in their own kind of understanding of the issues of language and others, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also picked up on that in terms of, care and curating. Bianca.
Well, I can also wait with my question if Jo wants to answer. Maybe she wants to come back on the comments and then I ask.
Thank you. Yeah, just to say to Kristina, that's really interesting about like the kind of language in Malta. So in the UK, we call that kind of language like person first language, because you're saying like person with a disability, like person with autism. And that's something that there was like a big push from disabled organisers to change, because there's an idea that there's nothing wrong with being disabled, and like if you have to put like the person first, then you're saying that there's something not human about being disabled. And like the example that people often give is like, saying person with autism is like saying person with gayness. Like it kind of makes it sound like a kind of condition, you don't use that language. But I think that context is really important, and like it sounds, I'm not saying this to say that how you do it in Malta is like wrong or anything, but it's just so interesting, because also probably like in another language the order of words will have different connotations. So like it's just really interesting to me. But that's like I'm sure that there'll be many different views, but that's kind of largely the organised disabled groups' response to that, and like their preference for language.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. I mean, similar. When I say in Malta, I'm referring more to the use of the English language because we're bilingual, but it's similar in Maltese as well. And the debate is similar to what you just mentioned, whether it's putting the emphasis on the person as a first or not. But interestingly, the people with disability have kind of made it very clear and public that is their preference. So it's interesting just to see how,
Cool. Bianca, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really fascinating to hear all the things that you're involved in and what kind of position you can make work from. I mean, such a deep engagement. I think that's for me, it's all already somehow the art as well, to some extent. I mean, it's embedded to really kind of a deepest personal level. And I'm wondering, who takes care of you, or what support system you have around you, because it's a lot to take on, like on all these three levels that you described, and what system you are creating for yourself to be able to cope.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was something that came out of the economic self-portrait thing, actually, that I had, that was really important for me to realize. Was I had like my partner Nick's name on it, and like emotional support, like kind of, well, I guess both ways, but like especially with my work, because it's hard because I like there's an amount of confidentiality, and like there's not a team like other people I know who are involved in kind of similar, like I guess like slightly like heavy, it can be quite harrowing, it can be like quite heavy, like some of the stuff that I've seen and that kind of happens. So I think it is, that would be something that I'd really love to build, is like kind of a network of PAs, because PAs are like that, like tend to be working on their own, and often with people who are really isolated, so you feel a lot like of responsibility. So yeah, maybe that's kind of the route to go. But yeah, I feel like I've sort of basically just, I guess, decided that like for my sake, like I need to not have those necessarily those like I need one person who I don't worry about confidentiality with, because I just can't do it if I can't talk to like one person about it. So yeah, but that's, you know, that's not without its problems. Like I'm not necessarily saying that that's right, but like it's something that's necessary for me. But yeah, a network of PAs or like lone support workers would be great, actually. Gotta do it, I guess.
Well, that sounds, I mean, again, that's kind of, yeah, I've got you there, Jamie. Sort of like something that's, yeah, I was wondering about sort of next steps or kind of practical things that could either happen in this week or something else. But that mapping exercise, as you say, if that's always been useful, is good. And just to give, you know, the heads up, obviously you've seen the programme, but I think when we've got Pyramid and Jade French that are coming later in the programme, just in case, you know, for the others, Pyramid's a sort of, yeah, collective for artists with and without disabilities, and I think the way that they're working in that field and kind of is in a very sort of like empowering way, that's, you know, again, it's complicated, but they're sort of working through it and finding ways to do it. Have you worked with Pyramid at all, Jo? No? Okay, so well, you know, that'll be something very practical that we can sort of put on the horizon, I think. Jamie, did you have a question or a comment? Or
wanted to comment on, well, first of all, I wanted to know what the weird art that you want to make about it is. But then I also was just really intrigued by the framing of that as like a retreat. And it really resonates with what Bianca was bringing up there, which is to say that like sometimes we can be self-diminishing in the, you know, the desire to express something in a kind of non-rational way. And it feels like that's like a toss, something you just do, and it's not as important as engaging on all these other levels. But I was just thinking that like it can be really important on that care level, and to process things as a kind of self-therapy, you know, if you need to express that way, it's also an important sort of place to go, to help either move through that period of your work or whatever it is that you're doing as a longer trajectory. Like I think it's just really, it's good to make sure that we don't put them in categories of like whatever, like weird and pointless and useful and rigorous, you know, or whatever.
Oh, thank you. That's like, yeah, really, really helpful to hear. Yeah, I guess I didn't have anything planned. It's just recently I have been having these like really bizarre dreams and like delays in waking up, where I am turning on the light and like talking to my partner about like things that I can see and stuff, and like just strange strange anxiety dreams that like stick around when I'm awake, and they are kind of like hallucinations, I guess, and like talking lots in my sleep apparently, and moving lots and stuff, and I don't know where it comes from. I don't think it's like, you know, the stuff that's coming up, it isn't work related or anything, but just this kind of is happening at the same time that the government is trying to stop paying people a living wage for sleeping shifts. So I feel like there's some kind of link there, and so I hadn't really thought much beyond that, but I don't know.
I think, yeah, with Jamie sort of picking up on there, maybe Bianca as well, kind of like that sort of general words, like, yeah, you're dealing with such like a sort of emotionally draining and time sort of, yeah, incredibly complex area that almost seems like, you say, almost a bit of a safer sort of way of exploring some of the things or testing out some of the methods as well. Or at least you've got those three sort of levels, which I think are very interesting to think about: the individual, the collaborative, and then the big collective or the big kind of policy, you know. So I think that spatial way of thinking about it is good, because there's something you can always be working on that might translate across those three levels, or it might just be something that you're able to, because a lot of the time it is, you know, you freeze up, don't you, or it's just too overwhelming to think, well, how can you do something of this size? And I think even when you're talking about those questions about co-production and how do you do co-production right, you know, because all of a sudden it becomes an ethical question, can just totally freeze people up sometimes. So it's good to sort of, I think, have those almost like three levels of practice and have something that you can be working on. And I think you've already identified the very strong links between those different layers. So it'll be great to see how they interact or don't, or, you know, kind of like, but to understand them as part of the same practice, I think is very sort of useful, mature, whatever you want to, you know, wise. Did we want to another kind of any more comments or questions to Jo, or Jo, did you want to sort of explain anything else? Happy with that? Okay. I think we're doing well on the time and kind of like, sorry, I might have frozen up there.
I was just I was just going to quickly mention, in case you hadn't, I think the Adrienne Mary Brown work, in case you haven't read her work, Josie, or you may have done, but anyway, it's just seemingly like a wealth of resource and ideas in there too.
Cool. Could you pop a link to that in the chat, Louise? Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I think it was the Adrienne Mary Brown just work, which, yeah, Bianca recommended to me. Yeah, I'll find a link and send it.
Okay.
He's got a great blog too.
Yeah, Jamie, can you add? Can you add some links? You may even have a book digitally.
I was just looking behind me because I think it's sitting here.
It's been censored, that one. Your touching up filter. What's it called? Sorry. I couldn't read it.
This is called We Will Not Cancel Us, which is her most recent book. But the one before that, I think the one's probably referencing, is called Pleasure Activism. I think Miguel brought it up too.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That was just that was not the right.
Okay, that's good. Well, like I say, useful to kind of keep as a record as well. So cheers for putting that in. Excellent stuff, Jo. And you're sort of like comfortable with this week and what you're sort of working on and sort of, you know, what you're getting out of it. That's good. So I guess we've got Kristina or Jamie next. Who'd ever like to?
I'm gonna go to the toilet, but I'm still like here. I'll be back in a sec.
I mean, how's everyone else doing? Because if people want 2 or 3 minutes before we go into the next one, I think we've got time to do that. Yeah. All right. Let's just give it. Yeah. We'll time ourselves on, Jo.
I might ring off because I've got to go on to this other thing at 4. So okay. I will. Yeah, Kristina's. I know about Jamie's work, but I can follow that on the recording. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Louise.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your ideas. I really appreciate it. I'll see you soon.
All right, in a bit.
Bye.
Are we
That's
on a
great, Joe. Yeah, you're yeah. Everyone else has gone. I was like, yeah, we'll take that as a little an opportunity for a break. Yeah, super interesting. I think it's good to sort of to be able to bring that into the residency is brilliant. Like, really good contribution, I think. How are you finding it?
Thanks. Good, like so interesting. Yeah, like thank you so much. It's like yeah, really interesting. I've never like worked with like so people from so many different practices, and like there's just so much learning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's been super useful for me as well. I just think, especially like in the last year or so, it's like, well, I mean, you know, and just working in Bradford and Bradford being so like can really just focus you in, and you done and sort of then having a bit of an opportunity to be sort of getting some different perspectives and connecting up with a wider group. I think it's really, I mean, a good thing for you to be doing just now. Because when was it that you graduated? Was it just last year?
Yeah, just last year. Yeah.
So me and Yvonne did the UNIDEE residency when a year after we graduated as well. So it was a bit sort of like, all right, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like you come straight out of it, and actually we were kind of like quite shocked with how slow it was. But you know, this is a different thing. Great. All right, everyone seems to be back in the space. I think, have we lost Bianca? Oh, she was having a little sort of like internet trouble, so I'll just, well, emailing is not going to help, is it? Was she there at the end of Joe's crit?
I think she wasn't, but I didn't know, like I didn't realize when she went, so I wasn't sure.
I saw her disappear.
She left
right
towards
when
the
you-
end of Joe's
Yeah.
intervention.
It was quite sudden though. It might have been like a
Yeah.
internet.
Oh, it's
internet
okay.
thing.
Here she comes.
Yeah.
Hey, Bianca.
Hi, sorry, my internet keeps on dropping off today.
That's all right. We were just having a break anyway, so I don't think you've missed.
Okay, fine.
The end of
Lucky.
Joe's. So
Just
no,
a break.
yeah, exactly. Very good. Very well timed internet drop. Okay, so yeah, we've got a good, an hour and 10 minutes more. I think it'd be good to sort of just think about the two presentations and a little bit of surmising at the end as well, or like looking at the connections a bit, sort of thinking about what you might be doing collectively. So yeah, we sort of keep around this sort of 25-minute time frame. It seems like a good pace to me. Kristina or Alan? Sorry, Jamie.
Okay, it's always reversed. I can go if you want. Is it Kristina? Do you want to go?
Yeah,
It's okay.
I was just thinking about the way that Josie framed her work, and probably the reason I made the comment I did was actually really helpful for me. So thank you, because I'm super interested in systems and infrastructures and kind of large scale things, and often through these days the framing of ecology and natural systems and science and geoscience. And Louise already mentioned this kind of involvement with the Haus der Kultur der Welt and the Anthropocene campuses that have been happening for the last 5 or 6 years, some of which I helped to curate. And maybe, I don't know if I should do this maybe I'll just share links just to break it up a bit instead of, so everybody can open it in their own time.
Yeah. Or you could just share the browser, whatever you like, but yeah.
Well, yeah, let's do a little bit of both. I made a few notes along. And what I was just thinking about with Josie's thoughts there is that there's a lot of this has to do for me with like how directly we try to experience these things, right? As artists and designers and different kinds of practitioners, like, so for a long time, what I was trying to do basically, Josie, was like really weird art practices about these political social systems in order to make sense of them kind of for myself. And so this is a good example. You'll notice how old it is from the color of my beard. This is maybe 10 years ago. It was a project called...
We're not seeing your screen share there, Jamie.
Oh, I just put the link in.
Oh, right, thank you. did.
I mean, if this doesn't work, I can do it the other way. I just try to switch it up. So this was a project where we basically looked at like public power outlets in the US, which is a really long story and has much more than what's listed there as a kind of a piece, which was a series of photographs of people doing very domestic activities around the city of New York using public outlets. And the story of why there are public outlets in particular places is super fascinating. Usually it has to do with like hedges or like trying to wax the marble in front of, you know, the New York Public Library and places like that. But also these power outlets are cheap because of, you know, effectively like the cheapness of oil and the cheapness of power in the US. Whereas when, you know, you move into Europe or whatever, there's far less of these things. The other thing that's always really fascinating, of course, is that like, you know, these are the kinds of systems that are leaky. And so like things that people like homeless people or people who are trying to get warm in the winter will often use these kinds of systems in a way of kind of exposing them and then coming up with, you know, different uses. So this is the kind of thing that I used to do a lot of. And so I could show a couple small pieces like that. This is another one, which I'll put in the chat, called Human Potential Movement, which was done in a kind of gallery context in Japan, you know, about the same amount of time ago, where I tried to hook up a bicycle to a hydroponic system in order to provide enough energy for myself to live. And I would eat the plants and, you know, bike for 8 hours a day during the opening hours of the gallery and stuff like that. It didn't last very long. The whole point was to try to figure out how long that would last. And I got through about 10 or 11 days and then got very kind of ill and there was no plants left. And so the piece was over. And so this is a way of like, I guess I was just thinking about it when Josie, when you said this about like weird art projects, like I found that very, very helpful as a way of, you know, understanding large scale systems, understanding the politics of, I mean, we didn't have this language then, but like, you know, the care that infrastructure provides for people, the way that like systems include and don't include certain kinds of communities, this sort of stuff. Because for example, with that first project, like when you go around and plug yourself into various places in New York City, you often have this moment where a security guard comes out and is like, you can't do that here, can you? And you're like, I don't know, can I? And then they're like, I don't know. And then you just kind of get into this loop of like very ambiguous and fascinatingly sort of exchange-oriented discussions and spaces that are not clear legally, not clear in terms of people's identity or facility, you know. So all that has led, for various reasons, into a whole research practice of mine. And one of the most kind of impactful projects that probably is worth just talking about as a backgrounder is this thing called Shift Register, which was a 2-year project, which was sort of very thankfully funded by the Swiss national government for us to go around. It was around the time that the Anthropocene campuses were starting at the HKW. There was a bunch of discussions about the definition of the markers of the Anthropocene. I don't know if people remember this, but it was like this, it still is kind of in the news occasionally where somebody says, no, it should be 1945 because that's when we invented the Haber-Bosch process to create nitrogen from the air, or no, it should be 1590 when the first colonies, you know, decimated the, you know, indigenous populations in North America, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was interesting because at the first session that I ever heard about this whole sort of Anthropocene question, what I got hit with was that at the front of the stage was like a biologist, a geochemist, a chemist, a cultural historian, if you're lucky, and all of them were arguing over who got to own the Anthropocene marker. And it was interesting because it's a bit of an ambiguous moment to read a scientist's motivations around this, which you presume is things like truth, I guess, or like fact making, but it's also about funding. And it's also about like, okay, well, if the, you know, the marker of the Anthropocene is atmospheric, then the next 50 years of scientific funding for Anthropocene topics and you know, anthropogenic climate change will be sort of routed towards that group. I was sitting in one of these sessions and I sort of turned to a collaborator and friend and said, why aren't there any artists up there? Like, why don't we get a shot at this little strange, pardon the phrase, pissing contest, or like this little kind of competitive knowledge epistemological game. And so we invented this project, which was basically about trying to do that. It was to shift the register of the Anthropocene was a phrase that we had about, it's now 4 years ago. And we basically made agreements with scientific field stations all over the world, and we're very lucky to be able to go on pretty extensive sort of field work trips where we tried to encounter the sites where the Anthropocene was being constructed, right? So like, where is the fact that the permafrost is melting in northern Norway actually coming from? And where is the, the idea that there's too much melt too quickly in the snow patterns in Montreal, more and more each year. Where is that lab that measures that thing? And the idea was, once again, to kind of make, I don't know, I keep using your phrase, Josie, but like, weird art projects about these massive systems, like, because all you ever do is hear about that fact and you have no idea what the aesthetics of it, what the motivation is, and around what that is happening, like, how is that happening? So I have a few photos of just some of these events where we were like, visiting on like hydrological research stations and see the photo before I tell you what it is. This was a guy in northern Norway, or northern Finland, who just does this amazing research where he measures the thickness of bird eggshells in order to determine how much climate has changed over many years. And he's been doing it for about 40 years at this tiny little research station up in northern Finland. And so we bring students with us, we bring artists with us, we ourselves record this and make sort of small documentaries out of it. And then usually try to do an exhibition in the space of that local field station, which were often quite funny in the sense that there's not a whole hell of a lot of audience in the places that these things are. But to sort of expose and try to bring back to that site, the way that knowledge had been created. So these are a couple of photos, I think, of that process. And so this was like, kind of a science communication project, certainly a DIY science project, and certainly a way of thinking about like, how do global discourses that are, have this mass effect of like talking about the planet as one thing, how is that actually being produced? And so that has led to a lot of work, with the Hakebe. This is something, like I said, Louise mentioned that we were on this trip together, but before that Mississippi trip, which was a very, it was actually kind of, if I may say, it was sort of inspired by that Shift Register project in some ways, because I was already working with them a bit as a curatorial involvement. But then throughout the entire Anthropocene project, there was this sub-project called Temporary Continent, which was a publishing outfit that I ran for quite a while. Which was essentially trying to publish the backstory of, the motivations and interests that the scientists involved in the Anthropocene and planetary change sort of discourses. Why do they get involved in this? We did lots of series of interviews, projects around like, what does lately I've been doing a project called The Impossibility of the Planet, which is Zoom interviews with scientists involved in geosciences discourses, and basically trying to just understand where they are. And so you have these interviews with like the director of the Anthropocene Working Group in his kitchen in Southeast England, and just this kind of disjunct between, again, like where you spend your everyday, what your actual aesthetic practice is, what you're doing, and what the received wisdom of that larger practice kind of is. And so I kind of went the opposite, or in some direction around what Josie was describing. Like I really tried to understand for a long time, like what the effect on my body was, what the effect on localized systems was, and to understand science in that way, and then go out and see it was another gesture, like go to do like these massive field trips and fieldwork projects and things like that. And then something shifted, and I think I have to admit, like I can be quite recent about this, although it's not that recent anymore, which has to do with the Corona pandemic. I think I may have had a slight travel addiction at the end of all those fieldwork projects. I obviously am not, not a ridiculous human being. And so I obviously know that like doing projects about ecology where you fly around the world all the time is silly. And that's the nicest way you can put it. But it has a lot of contradictions in it. I'm also, I think I got really involved in sort of ecofeminist discourses around that time as well, and realized that a lot of the impulse towards experience can be masculine and colonizing and about like the adventure. And when that hit me, or like I kind of understood that as part of this set of practices that were happening around me as well, like other people I knew who were doing lots of these kind of like Anthropocenic violence field trips, you might say, you know, which is a bit sort of, can be both opportunistic and a little bit extractive in its own right, even though most of the time what you're trying to do is expose other extractions. I just started wrestling with that quite deeply around the time that the pandemic hit, which is a big shift in mobility anyway, right? And so that's partly why I applied for the residency, I think, is because I think there's a shift going on in general about how people feel about planetarity. Like, obviously, we've all been through something, right? This isn't, I was on the phone to somebody that I know who's in Tibet and has been in Tibet for the whole period of the pandemic. And this is about a month ago. And I was like, how's it been there anyway? And his response was quite funny. It was like, yeah, you know, the cafes and restaurants are closed. I'm like, huh? that's how I explain it here. You know, it's just funny how like you could be sitting in Tibet and at least that small annoyance of not being able to go and hang out in a cafe with your monk friends is kind of like my annoyance of not being able to go hang out with my neighbor or whatever. So I feel like there's something common about our experience of earthliness and, you know, being Terrian and, you know, all these phrases that we love. But I'm trying to find ways of doing this that are not at a distance, certainly not in the temporality of projects. This is another thing that Kristina and I talked about this morning. Like, I've been so involved, like I'll throw up maybe a few links in the end just of like research projects I'm currently have ongoing, which are basically these 4-year projects that have PhD students on them that I'm kind of in charge of. And they have their forms, and I've realized that they're really limiting in terms of what's possible in terms of community engagement and stuff, because at the end of the day, they're over in 4 years, you know, and by the way, somebody has to get a PhD out of it. So that means that value gets extracted somewhere else. You know, I myself work in an art school and therefore benefit from that in various straightforward ways. But I would rather turn some of those resources more towards what I think of as like the center points of these value creation discussions that we've been having with people like Catherine and the group this morning. And, you know, like what are the potentials for that kind of resource to be Robin Hooded, to just say it really quickly, or redistributed, or even challenged upwards in terms of the ways that those kinds of projects and knowledge practices are formatted, right? And in this is a frustration with the representationalism of art, representationalism of academic practices, and something that approaches more like a lived practice of like the right to research. I don't know if anybody knows that. There's a great essay called The Right to Research, which is to say that like expressing yourself, your tribe, your positionality, your community is a right, and you should be, everyone should have the ability and resources in order to articulate that. And so I'm kind of flipping the work in that direction. One, and I'll just bring up a fairly institutional project that's happening in right now, but is an experiment in doing that, is a thing called Cycles of Circulation, which, you know, is trying to figure out how representation and control in science can be redistributed into communities, both through things like DIY practices, but also in terms of understanding the representational practices of science, right? So like a kind of diagrams and data visualization and all this sort of stuff, which is sort of hardcore design research. There's another project out there that's looking at artistic practices, and I think I put it on the Padlet and a few other places now in discussion. There's a project going on right now, which Miguel was mentioning, like European networks of these kinds of artistic research and action research worlds. And I just think it is interesting to bring up that there's these discussions going on. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of this thing, but there's a thing called the European Forum for Advanced Practices, which is really looking at things like forensic architecture, which Andy brought up. And we've written a charter. And it's about, yeah, like what is the possibility of institutional practices today? What is artistic research 2.0? What is the link between things like action research and artistic research? But the last thing I put in there, which is a project called Ground Tests, is basically like a bunch of attempts and tests at trying to do this. And so we're developing some community-based projects that will be honest and straightforward about what a research project that lasts 4 or 5 years can do. And we're trying to develop methodologies that would, be like more of the co-developed style that we've been talking about. What do communities need, instead of going somewhere and sort of representing that practice in creative circles. How can you give the tools and the voice and the language and the support, and then allow that thing to express itself in different ways? So that's slightly abstract, but one of the ways that I want to do that testing, which I just described, is with a project that is about bread. I'm very fascinated, and I'll just talk about this, actually, there's no more reason to have images here. I'm very fascinated with the political, ecological history of that specific material. Bread is meta-magical, it's magical realist, it's of course very spiritual, it has lots of references to Christianity and to our sense of like togetherness. It's also something that was deeply theorized at the beginning of political ecology by people like Marx, actually, right? Like he was very concerned with bread and its purity, and how like dirty bread was sold to the poor, because it was tainted with things like ash in order to make up, some of the what would be more expensive flour. It was like cut with things like ash and sand. And then of course through the 20th century we had this like purification of food into like white bread and Wonder Bread, and everything has to be sort of hermetically sealed and plastified and then but we also have this new movement of like kind of artisanal breads which are dark again, and this all has a racial history and all. So you can just keep like there's an amazing amount of sort of richness in the story of bread. Also, not to shy away from it, like this weird Instagram bread Corona moment, which I find super fascinating actually as well, in the sharing of practices and the kind of way that metabolism is both a media phenomenon and an individual choice about like, it starts to create these desire patterns through like media, which is sort of important. It's more important than you'd think, like the amount of flower sales that are driven by Instagram is pretty fascinating. And then at the end of the day, I'm trying to figure out a way of making a sort of research bakery. And this is very, very speculative and very, very open in terms of what form it would take. I've been talking a lot about mobile versions of this, carts and trucks and, like a mobile food truck bakery sort of idea that would be both instantiating a particular kind of political ecology, but then also talking about one, shall we say, and so I'm at the very early stages of that, but it's like the kind of, I thought like it was a good research and residency project to just put that idea in this week by week process, and then use it to get more definition around that as a model, as a physical object, as a funding possibility, and as a way of like kind of regrounding, I think, some of the more like, what's the word, like abstracted globalist practices that I got kind of involved in, which felt like they start to get a bit too distant from the weird art project part, Josie. So I don't know how long was that? Is that okay?
A good, probably a good place to open it up, Jamie. But yeah, again, great to get the sort of backstory and like cover all those different sort of practices, and almost, I mean, just to, I don't want to reduce what you've said, but kind of like that story that you've just told there, from going from more like the sort of performances that are aimed to understand the complex systems that you're looking at, to then really going out to them in something again a bit more sort of practical and diagrammatic, and then this moment that you seem to be at now, which is almost bringing it back home, bringing it back to the kind of like kitchen table or whatever it will be, to kind of understand that. I'm really interested in that sort of like move, that shift in scale, because it's kind of, I mean, a lot, well, certainly say if we saw like Jana's presentation, or maybe it's also the same with us in the interdependence, seems to just go in one way, where it's like, I have this individual representational practice, and then it's turned into this big kind of monster, and then it's kind of like, actually, I think the idea that things could sort of move between those two spaces is interesting. So I guess my question would just be, a simple one about what are you planning to do this week with bread, or what's the next sort of like stage?
Yeah, good question.
And then maybe some other people have some comments or questions as well.
I mean, I can respond a little bit. I think what's behind my comment is, I keep leaning on you, Josie, I hope you don't mind. But my comment to your presentation is that there's also just this sense of like temporalities through a practitioner's life. Like, it's not that I'm not that old, by the way, but like I do have this kind of series of like periods, I feel like, that we're precipitated by overloading oneself in one direction. And this is kind of a natural thing. You get kind of interested in something and you're like, okay, I'm going to test my body for 5 years, and then you get into like, and that gets exhausting, and then or at least you feel like you might have exhausted it, and then you go into these representational institutional worlds because you think, okay, I can make larger umbrellas things that other people can be in with me, and I can help make that practice go forward. And then you get tired of that, and it's okay, like this is what I mean, like you just need what you need through your own understanding. And that's, I think, one of the benefits of being trained as an artist, maybe a bit, or like having some kind of that sense of when the subjectivity meets the material or not. And so that's what I was trying to articulate there. And to your point, Andy, it's like not necessarily even like physical scale. It has more to me to do with like, I didn't get any of that, 10 years ago about like whatever planetary systems and infrastructure and whatnot. So I had my way of finding out about it. And now I feel like there might be an opportunity to kind of, both in more sustainable, actual practical ways, and in ways that maybe the world is more attuned to, allow that to happen through a set of exchanges that are actually kind of outside of art and outside of research. So like, I literally want to start a bakery, which is not it's not a conceptual thing only, it's that, but it's also just to move it forward in a way that like could feel a little bit more like the soda pop the Frizzante sort of directions, which I was really inspired by. It was a great presentation. So it's about scale in some sense, but it's also about like broadening one's facility and one's like kind of shoulder room to like have different kinds of practices that you can kind of draw in, and not limit yourself either through identity or through perceived methodologies that are that of course have their time and place as well. So. And what am I going to do this week? I got to be honest, I'm not that sure. I think I'm probably going to develop a bit of writing around this whole idea. Like I really want to get some input from people, like literally things, everything from like bread projects to that Frizzante stuff was really great, like, and just kind of sketch the world in which this could reside more. I'm really interested in thinking about organizational structures as well. One of my great sort of inspirations is Greystone's Bakery in northern New York State, which is a bakery that operates on a really interesting social practice model of hiring without interviews and bringing anybody in to like train and things like that, which I'm super fascinated by. I'm also inspired a little bit by these kind of transcultural projects in Berlin that have to do with like integrating Syrian bread making with the German traditions, and have looked into a lot of these historical sort of pollinations and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to sketch out like a narrative around it, what it really like, how to speak about it in the right ways, some kind of organizational direction, like would it hire people, would there be memberships, this kind of stuff, and then yeah, maybe think a little bit about how to make it happen if I can. Like, is it startup funding from an innovation fund in Berlin? Is it a grant from a cultural organization? Whatever. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that. Did anyone want? I mean, like Bianca, it really seems like something that you should you can offer some comment on.
I really enjoyed your presentation and like the journey that you've laid out. It almost felt a bit like assisting like the emergence of a post-humanist feminist practice, you know, to be like, okay, you know, I go and I see all these things, and then actually I'm drawn back to bread, or, you know, to something quite tangible and situated in one space. And yeah, I like that narrative that you had there. In terms of like the bakery, I think I should definitely put you in touch with Flora Mamana. She's part of the collective that we have here in Italy. And last year, together with her, I mean, she was the real main driver of the whole thing. We started a bakery on wheels with which we went around baking in public parks. And it has been pretty fascinating because Flora, she's really into this kind of Donna Haraway and fermentation. And I mean, she really likes the conceptual and the philosophy behind the whole thing, but then she just goes out and she bakes bread, and, you know, she ferments. And she also now, like, we're working on figuring out if we could set up a community bakery at the local train station where we work. So I think like it definitely would be worthwhile to have a conversation with her, because like on a conceptual level, she can really kind of, you know, she can drive the whole thing, but she's also just a very good baker. So it's a kind of, you know, I could imagine you trying to make bread together as well. I just put a link here of like her documentation on an Instagram account. And if you read German, I could send you her thesis. She's, I mean, she's defending her thesis at the end of the month, and an MA in transformation design in Braunschweig. And I think it's pretty, like, I wonder why she didn't do a PhD. It's kind of like, it's really thorough work, and it's interesting what you can put up there.
It's funny how you have to go all the way to this call to find out about her. I teach at Braunschweig.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't know about her. That's cool.
Yeah, and also the durational thing, for me, it really resonated. Like in my own practice, like since about 5 years, we say that we want to do a project that is 40 years long. And I think now we're even into like, okay, it should be 40 years, but we need to think beyond 40, like what's going to happen when we die? What kind of legacy do we leave? Kind of thinking in this idea of genealogy, like also reading Silvia Federici and so on, this idea that where we live in Alps, witch hunts have been really, I mean, really savage. Or, you know, it's like, yeah, it was one of the hotspots. And we kind of think that, at least we like to think that we're in a lineage with that kind of practices that have been, you know, have been attacked historically. And it's like, what did they send to us and what are we going to send forward? And somehow this, I think it pushes us on our limits of like, how do we think, where do we use our energies, and what is art and what is life? It just kind of starts to blur, which I think to me, it does it in interesting ways. And I think there is something to this durational thing, because even if we talk about the Anthropocene or ecological processes, I mean, 4 months, it's very short. We kind of totally need to think those longer time spans and see what that does to us and to our practice, how it transforms it.
That's great, Bianca. I think, I mean, also very nice to sort of bring that element up about, you know, what is it that we, well, again, it's another question maybe people to reflect on, but yeah, the embeddedness or the embedded aspect of the practice and where it comes from. I know I had a short conversation with Miguel about, you know, the exit strategy, and kind of like, I think when Jamie, what you brought up there, you know, just in terms of the 4-year funding cycle and kind of like how that is the tempo of these projects. And actually kind of, yeah, if we're thinking about embeddedness and the idea that it just does potentially disappear back into everyday life, then what does it, yeah, what's the sort of, yeah, maybe legacy isn't the wrong word, but the kind of, yeah, what's left. Let's keep it moving around, because I think kind of it can be a long session. I know you've done a lot of Zooming today already, and I don't want people to run out of energy for Kristina. So are you happy to present now, Kristina? Great.
Yeah, sure. So I need to share my screen. I don't have a presentation, but I have a set of images that I tried to put in order. Yeah. Okay, you should be seeing my images. Yeah, names. Okay. So the project that, well, the action artistic research that I'm going to present is one of my ongoing works in progress, and it forms part of a wider European artistic research project. So the wider European artistic research project is called AMAS, Acting on the Margins, Arts as a Social Sculpture, and it is a research project that has been funded by the European Horizon 2020 funding for research and innovation. So in this is the screenshot of the homepage of the overall project, and I opened the drop-down menu, so there you can see the different participating countries. Malta is one of them, where the general overarching objective, in a nutshell, very simplistically, is how arts can leave an impact on social challenges being taken in the widest sense of the term. And eventually it has a theoretical part and a practical part to it. And the aim is also to come up with a number of recommendations on a level of policy making on a European scale. And the practical part of this European project basically involves every country to approximately, I think in every country, there are like 5 practical artistic action researchers. So at least in Malta, there are 5, and the leading partner in Malta is the University of Malta. And basically, I've been invited to design and lead one of these practical artistic projects. In my case, I opted to work, in a town called Gżira. So this is just to kind of put ourselves into context. So this is the tiny Maltese archipelago. I always kind of like to show how the Google pin marker is larger than the actual land. So that's the Maltese archipelago. And if you can see my mouse, I'll be talking about this area. So as I zoom in, this is Valletta, the capital city, which overlooks 2 harbors. And I will be focusing on the West Harbor because the town I will be talking about is Gżira. So including this tiny island. And so that is kind of the contours, the borders of the territory. So it's situated in the central part, in the central region of Malta, and the word Gżira in Maltese, it's actually the Maltese word for island, because this particular town gets the name from the neighboring Manuel Island, which forms part of its territory, which is connected with a very tiny short bridge. And it's a town which originally developed as a small working class neighborhood, as a working class suburb from the neighboring bigger town on where my mouse is on the upper part of the slide. But it quickly transformed into like a business community of hotels, restaurants, online gaming companies, financial institutions, offices, real estate agents, and this sort of thing. So there has been a boom, a very huge impact of gentrification. And these are just some recent photos of different angles. So this is the promenade. As you can see, it has been taken during COVID. It's totally empty. And this is kind of the other side of the promenade. So you can see all the different buildings, the number of cranes. We started referring to the crane as Malta's new bird, because that's what's kind of highlighting our skyline. And yeah, over here you can see on the left where my mouse is, this is the neighboring town Slima, and Gżira basically is reaching that stage. And this is a photo which one participating community member, a local, sent me to show me his concern about the degrading state of the seafront. And these are just old pictures from the past that the participants shared with me last weekend. So just to kind of see also the difference in terms of greenery and in terms of development. So this, for example, is before the 70s. So keeping in mind this overdeveloped, over-constructed area, and basically it's being taken up by the private industry. Public space, open space has been sold to private entities to come up with shopping complex, luxury hotels, luxury apartments, etc. My research question is this metaphor, which entitles also the project. Batman Xirian. Xirian is the Maltese adjective for someone from Xira. And if I read through kind of this anecdote, which I tried to, so Batman is an everyday person. It is only his personal drive that allows him to achieve superhero power, a symbol of hope for Gotham citizens. He combats the crime, greed, and corruption of the metropolis. Batman is an everyday hero using his power for the common good. Is the Batman of Xira present in his absence? So I'm putting on the same level Gotham City with Xira, and whether there's a Batman within the community. So in relation to also to the community members who want to reclaim the town, who fight for their own territory, who fight for their own rights. And eventually the project should be leading to some kind of community co-created performance in public space, so somewhere in relation to the sea coast, to the promenade, or to that small island. We're still understanding what can be done, what needs to be done, what the people want, etc. So in doing this, I'm collaborating with an NGO which works for safeguarding the environment and the heritage and local heritage, and a community activist group. And this is an open call which we issued earlier on this year, where basically we were seeking people to be part of two specific groups. One of them a group of locals, and then a group of fishers. And when we published this open call, it was really difficult to kind of generate interest, because it was exactly at the beginning of the third wave of the COVID pandemic. So people weren't willing to meet up in person. So there was this transition of, should we go online? I was very hesitant about it because of what we already mentioned, digital literacy, which might exclude a group of people. In the case of the fishers, it just didn't work out because of no access to technology. So we decided to postpone the start of the sessions with the group of fishers. And in the case of the locals, we decided to actually experiment and shift online, because we felt that there was that request to a certain extent. So originally the idea was that these two groups, they start separately, but then at one point they converge. So this is becoming a bit, as I will explain later, a bit challenging, because the fishers are not in sync with the locals. So that's one of the main challenges. Another challenge which we encountered, the locals. So on the positive side, we have a group of 9 people ranging from 30 years of age to 80. So there is that wide experience of the town, of the seaside town, from the kind of 50s and more 40s, like wartime, post-war, and like the recent past, people in their 30s. But of course, this brings different levels of digital literacy. I had to, at one point, I helped some of the elderly people in their 70s to actually help them install Zoom over the phone, and to help them understand how to use it so that they could actually connect with us. Initially, I was rather anxious about it, but it was a very important moment in all this journey, I think. So we started off with research. So it was the first part was sharing of memories, personal experiences, anecdotes. So it was a lot about listening and collecting, sharing images, sounds, and thoughts. And here I experimented a bit with using an interactive online presentation where they could actually fill in this word cloud in real time. And getting their first impression of their town, what it means to them, what they like about it, or what they dislike about it, and what their concerns are. And however, after this session, I received a call from one of them who kind of was honest enough and genuine to tell me that she felt a bit excluded because she couldn't get hold of this. I'm talking about one of the elderlies. So then I moved on to something more tangible, so a bit maybe old school. And here I asked about what would be the top 3 elements, the top 3 notions which in your personal experience make up the soul of the place, the soul of Gzira. And this felt, I think, more inclusive for the people who were participating. Like it kind of put everyone on an equal level. And I also experimented with creating these handmade journals, which I then posted. And every session they are filling it up, and there's kind of a question or a thought where they can write their own thoughts, draw, paste. And now I need to collect them very soon. I'm in that kind of phase. So I'm curious to see what they did. I mean, I know the content, but I'm curious to see how they used it and how personal they made it or not. And I also experimented with a photo voice exercise. The plan originally was to actually, be on site during one session. And then at one point we leave the meeting place, the meeting room, and go on site and take photos together of their concerns, etc. So instead I had to kind of let go a bit and invite them to do it in their own time. And these are just some photos which they shared. This is a theater which is, as you can see, abandoned. It's not in functioning as a theater anymore. It's like one of the jewels of the place, and which they're really concerned about. This links to our discussion yesterday about delivery courier, representing the restaurants that are popping up one next to each other. This one, I apologize about the blurring, but this is a photo which one of the elderly people took from her roof. So I just wanted to keep it as it is. But in the back side, over here, where my mouse is, you can see that there's this construction, which basically it's taking up the sea. So after taking up all the open space and the land, now private companies are moving to the sea. It's a private lido which they are constructing. So they are actually taking all the berthing place, the moor placings of the fishers, for example, for their private swimming pool, etc. And this is the seafront, other photos that another participant shared. And then this is kind of another side of the sea town, a bit on the positive side, this dark village, which a local put up across a number of years. It's just on the bridge between the town and that little island that I mentioned before. So the kind of the only natural place where you can hear some natural sounds. And yeah, these are other details from that area, and this as well. So at this point, where I am with the local group, I kind of finished the collection part, the sharing, and now we should transition to some kind of development and start processing together with what we have collected and created. But there is this question mark on how should we go about this, because the idea was to have this hands-on. So should we continue online? But at the same time, maybe it's not ideal. And now people seem to be more willing to meet in person, but half of them, or let's say some of them, cannot because they have medical issues. So on the one hand, I was happy that because we shifted online, we managed to include a very important community member who has who's suffering from cancer. So she wouldn't have been able to join an in-person workshop. But now if we shift back to in-person, we would kind of exclude her. So I'm having those kind of questions on how we should move on. In the meantime, I just started with the second group, with the fishers. So I'm still understanding who they are, getting to know each other, what can be done, and eventually whether these two groups can merge or not, considering that they are at a different phase. So what I am planning for this week is trying to make sense out of these questions. I'm not sure if I'll arrive to an answer, because I feel it's quite complex, but I do feel the need to process the information that has been collected so that I can move forward. So I'm taking also this week as an excuse to hopefully find some time and focus on that. And I also would like to have a go at the redrawing an economy exercise that Catherine suggested last Saturday, because I missed it. And I would like to do it to hopefully help me highlight certain gaps and needs. Maybe it would be easier to come up on this. Yeah, basically that's it. That's where things stand.
Fantastic presentation, Kristina. Thank you. Like, really, you know, again, it's sort of really the thing that I'm struck by is just like, you know, you're in the midst of it, you're doing it, and kind of like, and actually kind of not that it's bad for people to have like stopped during the pandemic, but yeah, these things that you're actually testing and trying out to do with technology and working with different people, like you're on the ground trying those things out. So it's very exciting to hear about, and exciting to hear about that project in the Maltese sort of context. Just like, I mean, I don't know if it'll, a little tiny detail that I just wanted to sort of like ask a little bit more about, because it might influence all these ideas about how you process and where it goes next. But within the framework of the funded project, you are the artist, or you're kind of leading the project. It's your practice that you're going to produce this performance at the end.
I would like it to be a co-created performance. So
but just in general, it's like, it's by, you know, it's your responsibility to pull that thing together. It's
my responsibility, but I had a discussion with Jana during the one-to-one, because I always have this issue of, I mean, when this kind of work brings a lot of issues about co-authorship, co-authorship. Yeah. And I am totally happy, and I totally believe that it shouldn't be mine. Yeah. But it's not always easy to convince the institution about that. Yeah, and and again, just to kind of go into that, and the idea of the outcome being performance, that's a given. You have to be working towards that because of the funding. That's kind of been decided. It is a bit of a given now, because I mean, I was kind of given this budget, and to come up with a proposal, and we have an agreement now, like contractual agreement, basically.
No, it all makes sense. I just wanted to kind of just get an idea about which bits were kind of in place, which bits were sort of still open. So I think
what is not in. I mean, now I am having kind of doubts whether it should lead to such a final production kind of thing, because maybe there's no need to. I don't know, but anyway, I mean, it's a bit too late now. I think that's exactly a given.
I think that's the good thing to know. It's just like, yeah, if that's
exactly.
I'm not making a judgment. I just want to know.
No. But I also kind of I'm reflecting on that as well. What is not given is what's going to happen. So I want to develop that with the people, according to what they feel, according to what they need, etc. Possibly there will be other collaborators, so maybe dancers or body movement performers eventually. Yeah, but that depends a bit on what kind of performance it will be.
Yeah, any other? Miguel is actually listening. He's told me to know, but he's just attending to his son. So yeah, Jamie or Bianca. Or...
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
No, just one. I mean, it's really nice to see the work that you're doing and how you're engaging with what is happening locally, which is, I mean, big powers in place somehow, no, with the gentrification that is happening. And yeah, I don't know. I was wondering, like, how you entered the conversation around Batman as well. Did you get like feedback there from what they think other actors could be, you know, that speak up? Because Batman, I think, is like it's one kind of figure we can think of as hero, but you know, there is multiple hero figures that could be brought up, and I was wondering if they thematize that as well in the work.
During during the first session, I felt the need to explain my reasoning from where that is coming from, and I kind of asked if they agree with it or not, or if it makes sense for them or not, or if just it's me playing it up and, you know, like using fiction and whatever. And some feedback I got was that, okay, they kind of read the title in the info letter, whatever that we had given at the beginning, and they were curious about it. But kind of no one questioned in the first session, so I was glad that I kind of trashed that out. And yeah, one of them was like, yeah, I can understand now where that is coming from, and I totally agree. And even another one kind of agreed on that. And then what was interesting, in one of my follow-up emails, I think 2 weeks ago, one of them answered back with a totally metaphorical reply between this kind of fiction between Superman and Batman, and I had to read and reread and reread the email trying to make sense of this metaphor. So I kind of like the way how he also took this fiction and continued working on it. Yeah, but I'm sure there could be other heroes on that and other figures.
Nice. Yeah, again, I mean, I was also sort of intrigued with that bit. I mean, because sometimes in these projects, it's good to sort of just throw in something quite unusual just to see, again, like what you're saying, Kristina, just how it sticks and whether people sort of take it or not and give them that frame. But yeah, I think the idea that the people might sort of expand on it or do something more with it. And again, that's something I suppose just to think about whether that theme has to be or is going to be present
exactly
in the performance as well.
It all started off because personally I feel the need for a visual metaphor kind of thing. If I don't have it, I'm kind of learning my own patterns and reflecting on my own patterns. If I don't have it, if I can't hinge onto something similar or like this, the proposal remains very conceptual. So I kind of needed to translate my conceptual thinking into something more visually legible, and which kind of provided the storyline for the proposal. And then it kind of, yeah, it continued to stick. And I said, yeah, why not to present it? But I didn't want to impose it. So I've put it there out as a question. Now they're kind of referring to it, even when sometimes they send an email or something in the subject, they put Batman Zerian. I'm not sure if it will continue or not, but it could be an interesting question to continue discussing with them now, kind of.
Sure. Or it's kind of like, you know, also that opening up to it being something more like an Avengers team, an anti-gentrification Avengers or something. But yeah, I mean, I like the kind of the invitation there, and the kind of like, yeah, again, like you say, the metaphorical framing, because it's just how people can build on that. Jamie, did you had a point or a question?
I always do that and then I forget what I was going to say. I think I wanted to say something about counter practices, like this question of whether or not it's too late for something to be specified throughout the project and not like you know, that feeling where you feel like you're living through a proposal and you're just holding on. I think that can be really quite violent actually sometimes, and pretty hard. And so I was just wondering, like, sometimes, for example, someone will, you know, sort of offer up an opportunity like, hey, do you want to be in this exhibition or do this as a performance? And it's always a reminder to me, and this week has been good because a lot of people are doing that kind of gesture where you say like, yes, I'd like to participate, but not like what you just said, you know, like somehow like judoing the energy into your project or whatever. And so maybe there's a way of like expanding the notion of what a performance is, for example, so that you don't have to get stuck in this like one version of that, because there's maybe millions of traditions you can pull from. And
yeah, it's a good thought. I mean, I proposed the performance. It wasn't imposed on me, but now it's kind of course, included in the agreement. But I never defined what the performance will be. At one point, it was also something at sea, because there are the fishers. I would like to maybe possibly use their boats, etc., which they might have, or that they can bring contacts, etc. But then, because of ethics, the leader was a bit hesitant about it. So he said, let's not include it and leave it very, very general, basic, but vague. So in a certain extent, it's not defined. We don't define what a performance is.
Yeah, and I think what you're bringing up through that and then the process as well is just, you know, sort of, or in the context of a commission, essentially where someone's paying for it, is the level, managing those expectations and what people are saying. So as Jamie's saying, it's like, you know, it is nice to think you can sort of produce something that's quite open within that framework, but obviously then, you know, people or the audiences even, or the participants might have a certain idea of what these things are. So I mean, I'm not sure what the kind of, you know, again, it's not a solutions sort of based crit, but it's kind of like, yeah, they're interesting things to be looking at. There's this really good Italian group called Art Way of Thinking. Do you know them, Bianca, from Venice? And they did a really lovely kind of like Festival of the Sea, kind of co-produced with people in, I think it was in Venice. Do you know the project?
I'm not sure.
It's like they've sort of, I'm going to try and find.
Yeah,
I think they still exist, but maybe their kind of website's really out of date. But I'll send you the the basic thing, and maybe you find it through that. But yeah, Art Way of Thinking, they're called, all one word. And they did some, one of the projects I remember was exactly that, a kind of a celebration of their kind of like almost like a collective love letter to the sea from the people that lived there, and it kind of took quite unusual forms, but that's that performance could be quite almost very open-ended and very sort of like just people gathering for the day or something, couldn't it? Sorry.
Exactly. I mean, originally the idea, it all departed from the issue specifically about that small island, because that has been passed on to the hands of a private company, which all that island has been basically closed off for public access. And a few years ago, they managed to break the barriers and get access into the island once again, part of it at least. So at least now we can on foot go there and access the seashore, because technically the seashore is open public space, common good. It can't be privatized. And the idea was to kind of, my vision was to kind of create this hug wraparound for this island that is being lost. But again, that's an imposition from my end. So I never arrived to that point with my discussion. And I'm also sensing that possibly that's not the only issue that they want to talk about. The abandoned theater is coming up very, very hot, kind of. So yeah.
And I guess, yeah, just as a sort of, I know this is kind of moving on, we're getting close to the end, it'd be nice to do a little conclusion thing, but just, yeah, that, again, those sort of questions about, well, especially if the money's coming around this idea of social impact and social sculpture, was it, or social practice? I forget the fund is at the start, but just kind of like, you know, again, these projects that maybe come from a place, involve a great deal of research, consultation, take some sort of artistic form, and then what happens after that, you know, the idea that it then maybe goes back in and feeds into some actions around sort of anti-gentrification or those other things, and just kind of like, can you build that into this kind of like leg of the project, or kind of is there a way of diverting or keeping some funding back to sort of say, well, you know, so the follow-up isn't just did you enjoy the event, but kind of like, well, what practical actions might come out of the other ways of thinking that seeing this performance or being involved in this performance kind of brought together? Because I think it's a really important part of the kind of the public spectacle sort of, you know, genre of kind of art, is that, well, yeah, it's good to have it happen, but, you know, can we build in the time afterwards for not evaluation in terms of what did you think, but what can we do with that, or what did it make you want to do, and whether there's any resourcing of that afterwards.
Yeah,
so, you know, I'm kind of
that I mean, is one of the objectives technically, and definitely one of the constant questions for the community members.
cool. Okay, so are you, and you're sort of, yeah, well, again, you've been very clear with that, Kristina, so you know what you're sort of doing this week as well in terms of kind of unpacking and the questions. And again, I mean, as I say, you've really brought something that you are actively working with there, so I just think some of those conversations about, yeah, the specificities of using technology, who's included, who's not, might be really nice to share with the rest of the group as well. Okay, so I mean, so the next time we're coming together as a group for your schedule, yeah, the next scheduled sort of activity would be the talk with Letty B, which is on Friday, isn't it? I think in your yeah, in the schedule. Yeah. Which I think will be, I mean, Jamie, I think you'll probably be very interested in it, but obviously, you know, we've covered a lot of kind of like similar interests around sort of ecology and yeah, I think, and it's good to know what's going off in Biella as well. So I think it'll be nice to see everyone at that. And we'll do a little sort of like roundup at the end of that, just to kind of check in around this sort of idea of the traces and how we might approach that second crit on Sunday. But I mean, in general, I've just thought it's been, yeah, a very enjoyable session to hear from you all, like really kind of like, again, diverse set of practices, some of them like, you know, kind of much longer term, some sort of like the things that are just starting, but so much there to sort of learn from each other and hopefully sort of collectively work together. I don't know if you've kind of worked out methods for connecting outside of this session between now and Friday, but I mean, I'd really hope that happens, even if it's not an entire, all of you as a group, but you might sort of just want to sort of continue some of the discussions that have been brought up. Thanks to Bianca for facilitating excellently and kind of really valuable contributions again. I don't know if you wanted to.
Well, thanks to you. Thanks to everyone. It has been a real pleasure to spend the afternoon with you and hear about the work you're doing. I think, yeah, I'm certainly going away with lots of energy and yeah, thanks a lot. And enjoy the sessions also with Kate if you have signed up for them. She's good in the ones.
Right. So yeah, are there any kind of questions or anything that anyone wanted to sort of just ask or put or comments to make about the crit today? I suppose we've just missed out on Susanna, haven't we? And I feel it's a real shame because she's in your group. And so, you know, I've sort of said, oh, well, you know, try and get a one-to-one in with me tomorrow. And maybe there's a way of kind of, we'll share this with her and just sort of see if there's a way of her sort of, if, you know, maybe you can even find 20 minutes together just for her to do a similar thing, and or just get her feedback on this. It'd be a really nice way to draw her into that, because again, this is one of the things she's doing important work. So it's kind of, yeah, at what point can you do the reflection and when do you need to do the practice? So I think if we can be flexible on that, that'd be nice. And yeah, oh, did you have a point, Kristina? Yeah.
Practical question, because we were thinking that maybe, we're not sure yet, we're still discussing through our WhatsApp group, that on Thursday maybe we might do another kind of self-organized thing. So my practical question is, are there any times taken to use the login details from your end?
Thursday is my day off, so
okay.
Not from my end. Clara,
Okay.
are you
Anna, you can use our Zoom.
Okay. Okay.
So
No problem.
Thursday is the giorno libero
Okay.
for everyone. So yeah, okay. So I think, yeah, you can use this Zoom login in on that day, and that'd be great. And again, I don't know, you document it how you want. Always useful, you know, if you've got some ideas or thoughts or reflections from this, to put on the Padlet, just to kind of like, you know, so people can see what's happening in the 1 week intensives and how the things are moving along. That would be nice. Likewise, from any thoughts after this morning's session with Catherine, or your group exercise as well. It's just sort of like nice to keep a sort of record of what you're doing and share that with people as well, because it'll give them ideas or reassure them about what they're doing when they come into their 1 week intensive. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's like, I've got plenty of notes. I'll share them. I'll save the chat. I'm sure you've got your own notes as well to add to that. So I'll get those sent out. Yeah, now. And I'll put the recording. It'll be on YouTube unlisted. This is how we kind of like archive it all. So it's not available to the public. So I'll just send the link to you, unless you know, really as a group decide that it should go further. You can put it out there. It's down to you. But otherwise, I'll see you on Friday together, and maybe I've got some one-to-ones tomorrow or so. But anyway, okay. Thanks again.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye. Good luck with everything.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.